Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It was supposed to be just another job. 37-year old Marla Winslow didn't believe in haunted houses, cursed towns, or anything that couldn't be documented, measured, and dissected with logic. Her boots had stepped through war zones, backwoods cult sites, and serial killer dens. She had a reputation, unflinching, focused, always gets the shot. So when she got the call about Harrowick, the long abandoned mining town up in the remote ridge beyond the Black Hollow forest, she didn't even blink. There's something moving under that place, the old man had said over the phone, voice shaking like loose gravel. It's not wind. It's not natural. You want footage no one else has. You'll get it here. But you won't come back the same. She brushed off the melodrama. Every call like this started with someone whispering warnings they half believed. What mattered to Marla was that Harrowick had been sealed off since 1981. No power, no people, no records. A ghost town, quite literally. Perfect for her next project. But the moment she stepped out of her truck, boots crunching over a thin crust of frost that hadn't melted even under the midday sun, she felt it. Not fear, not yet. But something else. The silence wasn't just still, it was held, like the entire valley was drawing in a breath and waiting. The trees around the town were too still. No birds, no rustling. Just that brittle, stretched quiet, like a thread pulled tight enough to snap. The town looked frozen in time. Wooden buildings warped and sunken with age, their windows black like open mouths. Rusted street lamps leaning like drunks, their wires long since chewed through by weather. A church stood near the center, spire bent, door open like it had been left in a hurry. A forgotten swing set behind the schoolhouse creaked lazily without wind. She set up camp just outside the town perimeter, beside a dried, out-creek bed, a GoPro mounted on her shoulder, motion sensors on tripods, 2 handheld cams with night vision. She brought what she always did, cameras to catch what people refused to believe, truth in footage. But what she would capture in Harrowick, no frame would hold it all. No, screen could. Her first night was filled with odd noises, but nothing she hadn't heard before. Settling wood, distant animal calls, even the occasional groan of aged beams shifting in the cold. But around 2:11 a.m., a sound slid into her dreams and woke her upright. Scrape, then again. Scrape, drag, pause. It was faint, far off, but real. Marla, now wide awake and fully alert, gripped her flashlight and pointed it toward the direction of the town's center. The sound had come from there. Not a clean movement like footsteps or wildlife. This was wet and slow, like something was being pulled. She flicked on her thermal sensor. Nothing. No heat signatures. But when she aimed the flashlight toward the collapsed entrance of the mine at the edge of town, a massive, jagged wound in the earth half, covered in fencing and warning signs. She saw something shift, just for a second, something long, and then it was gone. She didn't chase it. Not that night. She went back into her van, locked the doors, and stayed up, reviewing the footage. But the cameras hadn't picked up anything. Not even the sound. That was the first night. The second day, she entered the town proper. Her first steps into Harrowick's main street felt like walking into a still life where time had bled out. The buildings weren't just old, they were touched. Doors off hinges, but not by weather. Scratch marks at odd heights. Symbols etched into wood that didn't match any known language. Inside the general store, jars of ancient pickles sat sealed and unbroken, while the cash register had been smashed to pieces. A child's shoe sat in the center of the floor. Just one. She moved quickly, scanning everything. The mine was her real focus. That was where the town's heart used to beat, the place responsible for its short, lived prosperity and sudden silence. Official reports claimed a cave and had sealed it in 1981, but the way the fence leaned in toward the hole, bent unnaturally inward, felt less like collapse and more like something had pulled. It was while filming near the old church that the second thing happened. Marla's shoulder-mounted camera caught it before she turned a figure, standing near the edge of the trees. Pale, thin, wearing something that looked like a miner's uniform. It was there for no more than 3 seconds. No movement, no sound. But when she whipped around, the clearing was empty. She reviewed the footage later. What unsettled her wasn't the figure. It was what stood behind it. Just barely visible. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. Something with too many arms. All bending the wrong way. And when she zoomed in, the figure's face was missing. Not bloody, not torn, just not there. Smooth skin, no eyes, no mouth, nothing. That night, she heard the voices. Whispers at first, faint, not words, not right away. But as the night deepened, the sound grew. Not louder, just closer. Like someone had pressed their mouth right up against her tent and started talking through the fabric. You brought eyes, but you don't want to see. She held still, didn't breathe. The voice sounded wet, like lungs filled with water. Another whisper joined it from the other side. She watches. It watches. We remember the mouth. She wanted to believe it was her own mind. The isolation, the long drive, the cold. But the tape caught it, clear as day. 2 voices, neither hers. The third day, she finally entered the mine. She had to. The opening was barely wide enough to crawl through. Old boards, half smashed, had been ripped away by time or force. She dragged herself into the black, the light on her helmet bouncing wildly off the moist, red-stained rock. For nearly 10 minutes, it was just tight, suffocating crawl space. Then the tunnel opened, and the air changed. It shouldn't have. There was no airflow. But it smelled new, not fresh. New. Like blood and metal and wet teeth. She stood in the center of the old cavern, shining her light over discarded helmets, broken carts, and a tunnel dug far deeper than the map said existed. There were markings on the walls. Circular, jagged, like something had carved them with bone. And at the far end of the tunnel, where her flashlight barely reached, was a hole in the floor. Perfectly round, black as ink. As she stepped closer, something moved inside it. Fast, wrong, something with joints that bent inward. She didn't scream. She doesn't know why. She just ran. Fast. Crawling, scraping her knees raw against the stone, she escaped the mine and fell out into the cold afternoon, lungs burning. But when she looked back at the entrance, there were footprints, following hers, but not hers. Too large, too deep. The 4th day, the town changed. She woke up to find her cameras dismantled, wires torn out carefully, like someone had studied them. Her van door was open, though it had been locked. Inside, her clothes were folded, her batteries were charged, and on the driver's seat was a single tooth. Human, still warm. She tried to leave. She really did, but the road was gone, not blocked. Gone. The dirt trail that had brought her in had vanished, under thick moss and trees that hadn't been there the day before. She walked 3 miles in what she thought was the right direction, and came out at the church. From the other side, she's been turning in circles ever since. Her footage, all of it, plays in loops. In the background of her recordings now, there's always a sound, a soft breathing, rhythmic, wet, and sometimes, just beneath it, a laugh. On the 7th night, she stopped filming, because her reflection stopped copying her. And when it finally smiled, it wasn't her face anymore. It was his, the miner, the one with no mouth. But now he had hers. It started with the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Marla jolted awake, heart hammering against her ribs, her breath catching in the freezing air. Her eyes darted to the tent zipper, already halfway open, swaying gently though there wasn't any wind. She reached instinctively for the knife under her pillow and waited. The knocking came again. Thud, thud, thud. But this time it wasn't outside the tent. It was beneath her. She scrambled out onto the cold ground, flashlight beam trembling as it cut through the darkness. She was alone. No movement, no sound until she crouched, pressed her ear against the soil, and heard it. A rhythm. Distant, muffled, like someone pounding on thick wood several feet underground. It was slow. Then it wasn't. Then it stopped completely. The moment the knocking ceased, the forest seemed to breathe. Trees groaned. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked like a gunshot, and the silence returned, not stillness, but that same unnatural waiting she'd felt her first day. Harrowick was holding its breath again. Something had changed. She packed quickly, grabbing only essentials. Cameras, light, her recorder, and enough food to last the day. No matter what, she had to get deeper into the town. Avoiding it clearly wasn't working. If the road out was gone, if the trees could move, then the answers wouldn't come from running. They'd be in the core, in the why of this place. She made her way down the eastern trail, where the old Harrowick Inn once stood, only to find something that had never been there before: a door. Not a building, just a door, freestanding, in the middle of the path. Tall, blackened wood, rusted iron hinges, a handle shaped like a downward pointing finger. It stood perfectly upright, embedded into the dirt with no walls, no frame, just a door where no door should be. Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed to walk away, but curiosity, the sharp kind that cuts deeper the longer it's ignored, held her in place. She circled it slowly, shining her light on both sides. On the other side, there was nothing, just more trees. But when she looked through the crack between the door and its jamb, she could see something else entirely. A hallway. Long, narrow, lined with pictures in frames that pulsed faintly with reddish light. It didn't make sense. She circled back around. From the other side, no hallway, just woods. But looking through the thin slit, there it was again, that same flickering corridor. As though the door opened not into Harrowick, but beneath it. The wind changed. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she marked the spot with stones and red dye from her kit. Then she backed away, carefully, making her way toward the church. If there were answers, maybe they were kept in the only place still standing with its roof intact. The place that had once promised salvation to this cursed mining town. The front doors were gone now, not broken, gone. Only ash remained at their hinges. Inside, pews were overturned, the altar shattered, but someone, or something, had been through recently. Fresh footprints in the dust, small, barefoot, and not alone. 3 distinct sets. 2 leading in, 1 leading out. Carved into the pulpit were new markings. Not like the ones in the mine. These were cruder, slashed angrily into the wood. They formed a circle with what looked like a mouth at its center. Rows and rows of teeth. No eyes, just an endless open grin. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, tu ifond asharias. Marla swallowed hard. Her flashlight flickered. The air grew cold, colder than it should have been. And then, singing. A child's voice, soft, wrong. The words were nonsense, half hummed, half gurgled, but the tune was familiar. A lullaby. Rock-a-bye baby, twisted, slowed. Coming from beneath the floorboards, she dropped to one knee, shining her light between the cracked slats. For a moment, she saw nothing but shadows. Then something looked back up at her. Not a face. Not quite. A glint of teeth. Wide, impossibly wide, stretching from one side of the crawlspace to the other. Not smiling. Just there, waiting. She staggered back, knocking over a broken pew in the process. The singing stopped. The silence returned, heavier this time. It was then her radio crackled to life. The one in her pack she hadn't touched in days. First static, then a voice. Marla, you're not filming. She froze. The voice was hers. They want to see. Her own voice, but not hers, slurred, dragged. Like someone trying to mimic her but forgetting how lips worked. The camera on her shoulder turned on by itself. And the battery. It was fully charged again. No blinking light. Just a constant red glow. Recording. She ran. Out of the church. Back through the center of town. Past the lifeless schoolhouse. But the woods had moved again. The red marks she'd left to find the door were gone. The stones were gone. But the door. It was waiting for her 10 feet ahead where it hadn't been before. This time, the door was open. And the hallway, that strange, impossible corridor, stretched out before her in real space. She should have turned away. Should have sealed it, run, done anything else. But something in her blood pulsed. Pulled. Her heart beat out of rhythm. Her skin itched with something just below the surface. And a question rang loud and wild in her head. What if this is the way out? She stepped through. The door closed behind her. The hallway swallowed the light. Inside, the air was thick and wet, like breathing through fabric. The walls wept dark moisture. The pictures on the walls showed scenes she couldn't make sense of. People with no faces sitting at tables, rooms filled with clocks all pointing to 3:17, children with stretched limbs playing jump rope with hair. She walked. The corridor bent in ways that defied space, looping back on itself, stretching too far, too tight. At one turn, she found a room identical to her tent. Her gear was there, her journal open. Her handwriting on the page, except the last entry read, "Don't trust the reflection. It learns faster now." She slammed the book shut and saw her reflection blink in the wrong direction. The hallway eventually ended in a stone chamber. At its center, a pit, a perfect circle, wider than the one in the mine, lined with bones. Hundreds of them, all child-sized. And above it, suspended in midair by strings of hair, hung a face. Just a face, no skull, no body, skin stretched tight, lips stitched shut, eyes wide and weeping black. The face turned toward her, even without a neck, and it screamed, not with sound but with silence. A pressure so heavy it folded the air, her ears blood, her vision blurred, and then she was outside. Just like that. Back in Harrowick, collapsed in front of the church, her camera still running. But the footage, it now showed her. Not from her perspective, from someone else's. Watching her, following her, the entire time, even before she entered Harrowick, even when she was still at home. A final frame played over and over Marla, standing at the mine entrance, and behind her, the faceless miner, mouth open, no sound. Yet somehow she knew. He was whispering her name. The sky had changed. Marla noticed it as soon as her senses returned. Disoriented, limbs stiff, vision swimming like she'd been pulled from deep water. She was still lying in front of the church, but the air smelled different now. Not just decay, but copper, like blood misted into the breeze. And above her, the sky wasn't the dull gray it had been for days. It was red. A sick, pulsing red, like something alive behind the clouds was struggling to get out. She sat up slowly, groaning from bruised ribs and the sharp ache in her temples. Her gear lay scattered around her, but her cameras were all still running. She checked the shoulder mount. It had 7 hours of footage. None of it made sense. The hallway, the pit, the face, all of it was there but distorted. The frame shook violently during certain parts, sometimes blinking into static at the worst moments, like something wanted to be seen but not recorded. As she scanned the church entrance behind her, she noticed something new. Carvings on the outer wall that hadn't been there before. Faces, dozens of them. Crude, uneven, all gouged into the wood. None had eyes, just mouths. Every single one open in a silent scream. They weren't there the night before. She would have seen them. The detail was too fresh, the splinters too raw, and yet they looked old, weather-worn, as if they'd been waiting beneath the surface and just risen when the time was right. She backed away slowly, heart thudding in her ears. Then she turned to face the rest of the town and stopped. The houses had moved, not in structure, in position. She was sure of it. The old post office now sat on the left side of the square, where the sheriff's office had been. The saloon's sign faced the wrong direction. The graveyard, which had been up the hill near the tree line, now stretched out directly behind the school. It wasn't subtle. The entire town had shifted, but the worst part wasn't the movement. it was what had appeared in the middle. A well, not old and moss, covered like the rest of Harrowick. This one was stone, perfectly circular and clean, like it had just been built. No bucket, no rope, no crank. Just darkness stretching down so far she couldn't see the bottom, even with her flashlight. And carved into the outer rim, in careful letters that spiraled counterclockwise, was a sentence, EVRYATE at go es dodu en ko mi of speaky do orange. She stared at the words until her vision blurred, heart pounding with a growing pressure that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. Somewhere deep down, something in her understood that this well was important, that it hadn't just appeared. It had been summoned. She turned to leave, to get away from it, to collect herself and maybe even scream if she had to, but froze mid-step. The buildings were closer now, half the distance from where they had been moments before. Like they were watching, waiting. The hairs on her arms rose. Her breath fogged in the still air. She took a single step back toward the church, and something whispered her name from the direction of the well. Not loud, not threatening, just familiar. She snapped her head around, nothing. But her camera picked it up. When she reviewed the footage later, the whisper wasn't alone. It was layered, one voice on top of another, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All saying her name, overlapping, fading in and out like a chorus underwater, and behind them, that same low breathing. Constant now, always just beneath the sound. She tried to rationalize it. A prank, a dream, the result of sleep deprivation and fear. But Harrowick didn't give her time to rationalize anymore. That night, she dreamt of walls made of skin, of faces pushing through them, whispering not in words, but in intent, urging her toward the mine, toward the thing buried below. And in her dream, she saw a door at the bottom of the well. The next morning, she awoke with dirt under her fingernails and scratches down her arms. The well stood empty, but the sentence had changed. Yao u alwead wam do wn. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She packed what was left of her equipment and went back to the mine. She had to. It was no longer about escaping. Something had cracked inside her. A split in logic, in resistance. And through it, Harrowick seeped in. The town wasn't just holding her now. It was learning her, studying her reactions, adapting to her rhythms, waiting for the exact moment when it could break her in the right way. The mine entrance was wider now, not collapsed anymore. The boards had been cleared, the fencing torn away like it had never been there. Something wanted her inside, and she went. Down through the narrow shaft, past the decaying timbers, down where the walls seemed to breathe, if you stared long enough. Her flashlight danced across old mining carts and rusted tools, and then stopped on a mirror. A mirror in a mine, framed in black iron, 7 feet tall, standing upright against the cavern wall. It reflected the tunnel behind her, but not her. She stood in front of it, waved her hand. Nothing. The tunnel in the reflection shifted, bent, tilted at angles that shouldn't exist, and then, from the far end of the reflected corridor, someone walked in. Her, but not her. The same clothes, same hair, same face. But the eyes were wrong, too wide, too glossy, and completely white. This other Marla tilted her head, opened her mouth, and let out a sound like breaking bones. And then she ran, full speed, toward the mirror. Marla leapt back, but the mirror didn't shatter. The thing slammed into it from the inside, pressed its face against the glass. Its mouth opened, and instead of a scream, it smiled. A grin wider than her own jaw could stretch, and then it vanished. She didn't move for a long time after that. When she finally did, it was only because she heard children laughing. She turned a corner and found a room that didn't belong in a mine, a schoolroom. Wooden desks, a blackboard, chalk drawings, but all warped. The desks were twisted at the legs, the chalkboard dripped black sludge, and on the far wall were pictures drawn by children, crayon sketches of smiling suns and stick figures with no eyes. But at the center of each page was the same shape, the well. always the well. And beneath each one, in jagged childish writing, 3 words repeated over and over: LETSHEROT. There were no answers, only invitations. She left the mine. Back in the open air, the sky had darkened. But not with clouds, with shapes. Floating, crawling things that blotted out the fading sun. And on every building in town, faces were appearing, melting through the wood, blinking slowly, eyes glossy and pained. Watching her. Always watching. The door was back too. The freestanding one. It stood near the edge of the graveyard now, tilted slightly, as though impatient. Open again. But this time, there were footsteps leading out of it. Marla dropped to her knees. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her camera recorded as she whispered one broken sentence into the silence: I was never alone here. Marla hadn't slept in days. Not really. Not the kind of sleep that rested anything. She would doze for minutes at a time, if her body forced her. But every time her eyes closed, she saw it: the pit, the well, the mirror, and the mouths, always the mouths. Wide open, teeth endless, lips split too far. Like something trying to mimic a scream, but forgetting how human faces worked. They didn't speak in her dreams anymore. They sang. And the song had changed. She sat now on the roof of the sheriff's office, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Camera still hanging from her shoulder, battery blinking red though she hadn't used it all day. Below her, Harrowick had grown quieter in the worst way. Not empty. Listening. Watching. She didn't know how she'd climbed up here. The day had blurred. The hours folded in on themselves. One moment, she was outside the church again, rereading the same message carved into the wall, THYFUNDHREWS, and the next, she was up here, looking down at streets that kept bending when she wasn't watching. The buildings moved when she blinked now. Sometimes when she breathed. She kept thinking, there has to be a way out. But she'd stopped saying it out loud. The sky had taken on a bruised purple tone, like something massive pressed against it from above, straining to come through. That pressure lived in her chest now. A constant, growing tension, like her bones were being pulled toward the well even when she wasn't moving. Every time she looked at it, she swore it was closer. And it was. It had been just beyond the town square yesterday. Now it sat at the edge of the graveyard, only 100 yards from the sheriff's office. It didn't roll. It didn't shift. It simply was, in a new place, each time she turned away. Marla climbed down before dusk. She didn't trust the dark anymore. Not since she'd heard the song underneath it. That evening, she followed the sound. The singing had returned, faint and choked, from the far side of Harrowick. She didn't know why she followed it. Curiosity had rotted into something sharper now, an obsession mixed with dread. Every step felt like it cost something she'd never get back, but the pull was stronger than her fear. She walked past the hollowed-out town hall, past the rusted swings and the schoolhouse that still bled from its windows, until she reached the edge of what used to be the mayor's estate. The house was gone. In its place was a clearing lined with black stones, and 4 crooked wooden poles rising from the ground, each wrapped in wire. Teeth and what looked like wet cloth, and in the center of the clearing a girl. Or what looked like a girl. She stood perfectly still, hair falling over her face, arms at her sides. She wore a faded yellow dress, stained and damp around the hem. Her feet were bare. Her shadow stretched out behind her in a way that didn't match the light. Marla didn't move. The girl began to hum. The same lullaby from the church. Rocka by Baby, but twisted, slowed, sung in a tone that made the air ripple around her. The moment Marla blinked, the girl vanished. And behind her, the wooden poles groaned. Marla's flashlight flickered once, then again. And when it steadied, the poles were bending, leaning in, their wires twitching, the cloth unraveling, revealing bones, skulls, some with eyes still in them. She ran. The humming followed her. It didn't echo. It didn't come from behind. It came from inside her own head. She screamed once, out of desperation, just to drown it out, and something screamed back, from every direction. Not loud. Hungry. She collapsed near the well, gasping, shaking, covered in a cold sweat that hadn't been there moments before. The singing faded slowly, but the damage lingered. Her ears rang. Her vision pulsed at the edges, and the well was open. Something inside it breathed. Not air. Not wind. It was wet and slow and deep. A movement of something alive that had been asleep for far too long. She could feel it pressing against her thoughts now, sliding beneath her skin. Then came the voices. Not from the pit. From around it. The graves behind her had split open. Dozens of them. No bodies. Just open caskets, shattered wood, broken stone. And standing between them were figures. Still. Watching. Each wore a miner's helmet. Each had no face. They didn't move. They didn't need to. The earth around them shifted, pulsed in rhythm with that breathing beneath the town. And when Marla turned her camera on them, they turned their heads in unison toward her. Not fast, not slow, just enough to show they knew. She backed away, then stopped, because something was crawling out of the well. No limbs, no sound, just a long, or wet shape, like a tongue, or a spine, or a thought given flesh. It slithered up the stone side slowly, leaving streaks behind it that hissed and sizzled in the cold air. And attached to the end of it, a mouth. Just a mouth, gasping, grinning. Singing. It didn't have a throat. No body. Just lips, teeth, and a darkness beyond it that seemed to stretch forever. Marla turned to run and saw herself, blocking the path. Same face, same hair. But the eyes, gone, replaced with black pits that swirled like oil in water. This other Marla lifted one finger to her lips. Shah. The real Marla blinked, and she was alone. Again, except the town was different. Every building now bore a mark, carved deep into their fronts. A symbol of a mouth surrounded by smaller shapes, like heads bowed toward it. She didn't need to ask what it meant. She knew. It was her. She was becoming part of it. The dream returned that night, though she didn't remember falling asleep. Walls of flesh, eyes under her fingernails, her own voice singing from somewhere else. Not in her mouth, in the trees, in the wind. When she woke, she was standing at the edge of the well. No memory of walking there. Her camera was rolling. The screen showed static, but the audio, it was clear. Let her out, a voice just behind her. She turned and saw the little girl in yellow, smiling now. Her mouth was too wide, and inside, another mouth, smiling too. Marla didn't scream when she saw the second mouth inside the girl's. Her voice had been left somewhere else. Maybe inside the well, maybe in the hallway behind the black door, or maybe it had been swallowed by the town the way it was swallowing her piece by piece. She backed away slowly, careful not to break eye contact. But the girl didn't move. She didn't need to. That smile, that impossible, splitting grin, said everything. We've seen you. We've learned your shape. Marla's legs moved before her brain gave permission. She ran. Past the graves. Past the crumbling buildings. She didn't look back. Didn't dare. Every window seemed to watch. Every shadow twitched when she wasn't looking. Her thoughts jumbled and spun, her vision warping like heat off pavement. Heroic was folding in on itself. But worse, something new was growing inside it. She reached the general store, ducking into its rotted shell for cover. Dust filled her throat. The place had collapsed on one side. Beams bowed inward like they'd been crushed by a giant hand. Shelves lay overturned, glass shattered across the floor. And yet, someone, or something, had been there recently. The dust was disturbed. Footprints. Small. Bare, leading toward the back. She followed them. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door at the rear of the store. She didn't expect it to open. Half the buildings in Harrowick had sealed themselves shut, by now, either warped by age or simply changed by whatever presence loomed beneath. But this one creaked open with eerie ease. Beyond it, stairs, leading down. There had never been a basement, not in the town's original layout. She was sure of that. She had studied every map before driving up into these woods. The town had been small, simple, functional. A single floor general store. No basement, no lower level. And yet here it was, descending into absolute blackness. The air pressing against her like wet wool. She descended slow and deliberate. Each step moaned under her weight. Her flashlight beam was swallowed by the dark, the battery suddenly sputtering despite being fully charged moments earlier. She clicked on her backup light. It flared, then dimmed to a dull orange glow. Just enough to see that the walls weren't made of stone or wood. They were made of faces, hundreds of them. Not carved, not painted, real. Pressed into the walls like something had absorbed them alive. Some wept. Some opened and closed their mouths, mouthing words she couldn't hear. Others just watched, eyes milky, expressions frozen in mid-scream. She moved quickly now, fighting bile in her throat. The stairs curved left, then right, then down again in a spiral that made no architectural sense. And the deeper she went, the clearer the hum became. That same cursed lullaby, echoing off the walls in a dozen mismatched voices, overlapping, discordant, wrong. When the staircase finally ended, she stepped into what she first thought was another cavern. But it wasn't a cavern, it was a town. Another Harrowick, beneath the real one. It looked exactly the same. The buildings, the layout, even the same crooked church steeple. But everything was inverted. Upside down. The buildings hung from the ceiling like stalactites, held there by roots and bone and threads that pulsed like veins. And the sky above black. Not empty. Alive. Something massive churned just beyond the visible dark. She couldn't see it, not clearly, but she felt it. Marla's legs trembled. This was not a reflection. It wasn't symbolic. This was Harrowick. The part of it buried by time, rot, and something far older than either. She stepped forward and realized she was not walking on stone or soil. The ground beneath her boots writhed ever so slightly. Skin. Stretched taut, with small breathing holes spaced every few feet. She gagged. The buildings above her swayed in slow rhythm, like they were breathing too, like the whole town was a lung. And through the stillness, a voice spoke. Not from behind her, not beside her. From inside her skull, a whisper so intimate it felt like someone pressing lips directly against her thoughts. She let it in. Marla spun. No one there. But her shadow was smiling. It stretched long and tall behind her, twisting at odd angles, its mouth curling wide despite hers remaining closed. She turned in circles, heart thundering as the voice returned. We watched. We waited. Now you're ours. She ran. Nowhere in particular, just away. Past buildings that hung like diseased teeth, over pathways that pulsed under her steps. Her light flickered, then died. And in that darkness, something moved, not walked, slithered. It moved like a sound-made flesh, undulating just out of reach, brushing her with icy air and the scent of metal and rot. It didn't chase her. It just followed, deliberately, patiently, because it didn't need to hurry. Harrowick was closing, like a trap. She ducked into a building that mirrored the schoolhouse. Inside, everything was upside down. Desks above her head, chairs hanging from the ceiling by tangled rope. Chalk scrawled backward across blackboards in languages she couldn't decipher. And on the far wall, another mirror, just like the one in the mine. She approached, teeth gritted, half in terror, half in rage. Her reflection stood still, then blinked, out of sync, again not quite her. This time, the figure raised one hand and cut across its own throat. Blood didn't pour. Instead, moths flew out. Hundreds of them. They slammed into the glass on her side, leaving black smears before falling to the ground and melting. Her reflection smiled, then stepped backward into the dark. Behind her, the girl in yellow began to hum. The sound came from every wall now, her voice stitched through the fabric of this underground Harrowick. It wasn't just a song. It was instructions. The walls responded, pulsed, shifted, and beneath the melody, another voice joined in. Deeper, older, hungrier. Marla collapsed to her knees, hands over her ears. It didn't help. The sound wasn't in the air. It was in her teeth, in her bones. Her nose began to bleed. Her eyes watered black. Then everything stopped. Silence. And in that silence, a sentence echoed from every direction, overlapping itself in infinite layers. She opened the first mouth. There are more. The floor split open beneath her, and Harowick took her again. Marla hit the ground with a thud that stole the air from her lungs. Not rock, not dirt. It was soft, damp, warm, like landing on something that was once alive and hadn't realized it was dead yet. She gasped for air, coughing hard. Eyes blurring, the metallic taste of blood sharp in her throat. It took a moment to realize it wasn't hers. Her hands came away slick and red, but the skin beneath was uncut. The blood was already there, waiting for her. The room around her pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat deep underground. There were no walls in the traditional sense, just flesh, thick, vein-laced, gently undulating, stretching in all directions with no corners or ceiling. The entire space felt wrong in a way her mind refused to name. She tried to stand, slipped, caught herself on something hanging from the wall, a hand. Human. Frozen in a curled position, fused into the meat around it. She didn't scream. Not anymore. Screaming felt like punctuation in this place. Unnoticed. Expected. The air was thick with the copper sting of decay and something sweeter. Rotting, it clung to her like fog. The dim reddish glow that lit the chamber came from nowhere, and yet it outlined the grotesque features all around ribs half, submerged in walls, teeth pressed into the floor like stones, eyes blinking slowly in the ceiling above. She staggered forward, each step squelching. Her boots stuck to the ground with every move. Above her, the ceiling eyes followed, all of them, watching, judging, recording. Her camera, long dead, now hummed quietly from her shoulder, blinking like it had just woken up. That's when she heard it, a voice. But this time it didn't whisper, it spoke. Low, slow, not in words she knew, but words that pressed into her skin like heat. It rolled through the chamber, vibrating the very ground she stood on. She covered her ears, but it didn't help. It was speaking through her, into her bones, and she understood it anyway. We remember the shape of pain. The voice came from ahead, beyond a curtain of muscle that twitched like it was breathing. As she moved closer, the curtain split without touch, parting like a living maw, revealing another chamber. This one was different. Drier, silent, and in the center of it, bound to a massive pillar of bone, was a man, or what was left of one. His body was wrapped in tendrils, skin grown into the pillar itself. His mouth was sewn shut with hair, but his eyes were open, wide, wild, sane. Too sane, she approached cautiously. His gaze locked on hers instantly, and as she stepped into the chamber, his body convulsed. His mouth trembled behind the threads. A small sound escaped his nose, a whimper, pleading, desperate. She reached to cut the hair, but the moment her knife touched it, the room screamed. Not the man. The room. The walls quivered violently. Eyes slammed shut. Blood sprayed from unseen vents in the ceiling, coating the floor in seconds. Her hands slipped again. The pillar pulsed, and the man's mouth opened without breaking the threads. And then he spoke. Not with voice, but with her own memory. Flashes hit her mind like hammers. A miner swinging an axe at nothing in the dark. A woman weeping into a broken mirror, her face shifting between 3 different versions of herself. Children laughing around the well, singing as one of them was lowered inside by invisible hands. The girl in yellow, standing perfectly still in a room that kept changing behind her. Then came the final image. Marla, standing at the edge of the mine, smiling, willing, inviting it in. The man's body spasmed, and from his chest, a shape began to emerge. Something inside him, pushing through the skin as though it no longer needed a host. It stretched, tore, and slipped free. A faceless, twitching creature made of tendons and teeth, trailing long fingers made of fused jawbones. It turned toward Marla. No eyes, yet it saw her. Then it did something unexpected. It bowed. The creature lowered itself to the floor, limbs folding backward, mouth twitching into a grin of cracked enamel and bone, and without sound, it moved its head from side to side in a mimic of speech. Marla stared, not breathing, as the words entered her mind like a cold hand. "We were forgotten. You remembered." She stumbled back. No, she hadn't. She didn't remember anything, but the well did. The thing beneath the town remembered everything for her. The creature rose, towering now, its body folding over itself like silk made of cartilage. It stepped aside, revealing a tunnel that had not been there before. A passage formed of vertebrae and woven hair, pulsing faintly with distant music. The same twisted lullaby. She didn't want to follow, but her body did. Her legs moved without her permission, carrying her forward as though the choice had never belonged to her. The tunnel swallowed her, the walls narrowing, pressing close, stroking her shoulders like a lover. Faces whispered from the walls again, but this time they spoke words she recognized. "You fed it. You called it. You are the mouth now." She emerged into a vast underground chamber, not of flesh, not entirely, but stone. Ancient, carved with symbols older than language. And in the center stood a throne. Empty, carved from fused spines and skulls, pulsing with an energy that made her teeth ache. And behind it, etched into the wall in letters 12 feet tall, were 3 words THEMOUHO pens. Her knees gave out. She knew now. She hadn't come to Heroic to uncover the truth. She had come to awaken it. Marla couldn't move. She sat at the base of the throne of bones, back pressed against the cold stone, body trembling as though her muscles had finally understood what her mind refused to. She wasn't in Heroic anymore. Not the one she'd driven into, not the one on the maps. That place had been a costume, a rotted skin stretched over something older, vaster, alive. This was the true Heroic, the part buried not under dirt, but memory. The part no one remembered because it wanted to be forgotten, and now it remembered her. The room had no sound, not even the echo of her own ragged breathing. That was the first thing she noticed, the silence. Not absence, not stillness, something deeper. A kind of silence that didn't lack sound but devoured it. Her own breath, loud in her chest, made no noise in this place. She clapped once. Nothing. Screamed. Not a whisper. Her voice had been swallowed. She looked around, desperate for anything human, anything normal to cling to. But everything about this chamber denied comfort. The walls were too smooth, the floor too cold, the throne too precise, not built, grown. The bones weren't just stacked. They were fused, knotted together like the thing that made them never died, just changed. And it wanted her to sit. She could feel it in the pulsing beneath the stone, in the pressure crawling through her skull like roots threading deeper into soil. The longer she stayed in the chamber, the more her thoughts unraveled, not scattered, but rearranged. Memories began to reorder themselves. The drive to Heroic, the old man's warning call, her first step into the mine. They weren't lining up right. Faces appeared where they hadn't been. Names changed. Locations swapped. She began to doubt what she'd actually seen, what she had only imagined, and what had been given to her. That's when she noticed the crack in the wall. It pulsed softly. A thin line of red light cutting through the stone, just to the right of the throne. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and the chamber simply hadn't wanted her to see it yet. Her hands moved on instinct, scraping at the crack, prying her fingers into it. The wall was soft beneath the surface. It peeled like skin. The stone hissed. Not loud. There was still no sound, but visibly. She tore the seam open, revealing a narrow passage carved from material that breathed. She stepped inside. It was a corridor, but not linear. The walls curled, twisted, moved slightly when not watched. Her flashlight barely held up. Its beam flickered every few seconds, catching glimpses of scrawled messages on the walls in a language that hadn't existed in centuries. Sometimes she thought she saw her own name written there, but the letters were always wrong. Too many curves, too few angles. Like someone remembered how to almost write it. She followed the path until it widened into a circular chamber. In the center, a table. Wooden. Ordinary. Stained with ink and something darker. And seated around it were 5 people. Dead, but not decomposing. Their heads had been opened, cleanly split from crown to nape, and emptied. Not mutilated, hollowed. Their eyes stared without focus. Their mouths hung open, tongues missing. Each one wore a name tag. She stepped closer. One read Harald Wyaslow. She froze. That was her father's name. Another Tamar Hiles, her childhood best friend, dead in a car crash at 16. Another Marla Wyaslow, her own name. But this Marla was older, much older. Her face sunken, her hands gnarled, fingernails grown into the table itself. Her mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, sewn into it, as though something had pulled the skin up over the cheeks and stapled it there to simulate joy. Marla stumbled backward, hitting the wall, her breath catching in her throat. The flashlight dropped from her hand, skittering across the floor. Darkness rushed in, but the silence did not return. Instead, something breathed behind her. She turned. No one. But on the wall now, words had appeared, written in thick, dripping black ink that hadn't been there a moment before. EVRVR CRO. OFYOUCTs HER EVENTIOLY. She ran. Back through the pulsing corridor, slipping on the uneven floor, ignoring the bones that pressed from the walls like they wanted to shake her hand, scream in her ear, crawl inside her skin. She burst back into the throne room, but something had changed again. The throne was no longer empty. It held a figure, tall, skinless, its body wrapped in cloth soaked black with something that dripped endlessly to the floor, pooling around the base. Its face was a flat plane. No features, just the vague outline of a smile carved deep into where a mouth should be. In its lap, it cradled something. Her camera. And it was playing. The screen displayed footage she hadn't taken. A woman, her, standing at the edge of the well, laughing. Laughing and dancing, barefoot, arms raised like she was welcoming something. Then she jumped in. The screen went white, and the figure on the throne finally moved. It lifted its arms slowly, fingers crooked like claws, and pointed to the wall behind her. Marla turned. A new doorway had opened. Not flesh, not bone, glass, a mirror, but not a reflection, a window. Inside it she saw a house, a familiar one, her house, her kitchen, her couch. Her phone sitting where she left it, a soft breeze from the open window, a version of her life before Heroic, untouched, still waiting, a way back. Marla stepped toward it, eyes wide, chest tight, fingers brushing the glass, and the mirror spoke. It said nothing human, just one long, low moan that vibrated through the stone. The scene inside changed. Now she saw herself, current, shaking, eyes wild, walking through that kitchen, picking up the phone, dialing a number. Her own number. The screen shifted again. Now she was watching herself answer it. 2 versions of herself, separated by a thin pane of reality, speaking words she couldn't hear. Then, slowly, both versions turned to look at her, and smiled. Identical, predatory, and knowing. The mirror shattered, the room collapsed inward, and Marla knew. Without a doubt, the silence she had stepped into had never been empty. It had simply been waiting for her to listen. Marla didn't know if she screamed when the mirror shattered. The sound was sucked straight from her lungs before it could leave her throat, swallowed into that awful, churning silence that had become more familiar than her own name. Her ears rang with absence, like her body had registered the noise, but the world refused to play it back. 1 second she stood in the throne room, the next she was on her knees, hands bleeding from 1,000 glass slivers, heart thudding like a drum in an empty cathedral. Wherever she was now, it wasn't the same place. The room had vanished. No throne, no walls, just void. A massive, black expanse stretching in every direction, ceilingless, borderless, like she had fallen into a dream with no center. The ground beneath her felt like glass, smooth, cold, impossibly thin, but she could see nothing below. Only endless dark, like walking on the surface of a still lake at midnight, knowing there were things just beneath the surface, watching for ripples. And she wasn't alone. Shapes stirred at the edge of her vision. Flickers. Movement where nothing should be. She turned her head quickly, too quickly, and they vanished. But when she turned back, they had moved closer. Each flicker was a figure, barely defined, just silhouettes in motion, sometimes walking, sometimes crawling, sometimes simply hanging in the air like meat hooks waiting for a scream. They didn't rush her. They didn't lunge. They waited. That was worse. Marla's breath quickened. Her flashlight was gone. So was her camera. So was her bag. Only her body, her broken hands, and the crushing certainty that this place wasn't new. It was beneath everything. Beneath Heroic. Beneath the well. Beneath memory. This was where it all led. The Hollow. She hadn't heard the name before, not spoken out loud. But it bloomed in her head now like a poison flower. The Hollow. The place beneath places. The room that remembers you back, somewhere in the distance. Or maybe directly inside her mind. She heard the first voice. Not whispering. Not mocking. Speaking calm. Measured. Almost gentle. You brought your reflection. You fed it well. Another voice joined it, this one higher, strained like vocal cords stretched too thin. You opened the mouth. Now you must learn the shape of hunger. Marla turned in circles, eyes darting, trying to locate the sources. But there were no mouths, no faces. Just that endless black and those figures. Closer now. Their movements twitchier, some dragging, some pulsing like sacks of fluid being pulled by something above them. She walked. Nowhere in particular, just away from the voices, though that no longer meant anything, in a place where direction had lost all loyalty. The floor remained stable, though her footsteps made no sound. Her shadow stayed put. Until it didn't. She glanced to the side. Her shadow kept walking. Then it turned to face her, and waved. She froze. It mimicked her stance, then crouched. Then stood again, all without her moving, all with her shape, her body. But its mouth, because now it had one, was wrong. Too big. Too sharp. The shadow grinned, then darted forward like lightning. She didn't scream. Just flinched. And the floor gave way beneath her. She fell into herself. Or through herself. It wasn't a drop so much as a collapse inward, like being turned inside out by hands she couldn't feel. Then, impact. She was back in Heroic, maybe. Same buildings, same crooked trees, same blood-colored sky. But everything was reversed. The signs on the stores were written backward. The church faced west instead of east. The well was gone, but in its place stood a staircase made of teeth, and she was being watched. Figures lined the rooftops now. Faceless, limbs too long, skin too tight, all facing her, heads tilted at angles too far to be natural, like broken dolls trying to nod. One stepped forward, and another, until they surrounded her in a loose circle, just out of reach, their mouths opening slowly. No sound came out, but in her mind, her deepest mind, she heard a chorus, "This is what it costs to see," and then a pulse shook the ground, like a heartbeat. Massive, old. The sky tore. Right down the center, a crack of light. No, not light, but something else. Split the clouds, and through it, Marla saw a single eye. Blindingly large, glossy, wet, with a pupil shaped like a spiral. It saw her and smiled. Not with lips, with thought, with pressure. With that insistence in the air that made the inside of her mouth taste like rust and flowers. She dropped to her knees, clawing at her scalp. Not from pain, but to keep herself inside her body, because something was trying to pull her out. Thoughts not her own began to slip into her head, names she didn't know, places she'd never seen. A little girl calling for someone named Mother Hollow, a man in a flooded room hammering nails into his own ears to drown out the singing, a miner swallowing rocks, believing they were voices, a mirror buried in a garden that showed you what your skin looked like from behind your eyes. Then the spiral eye blinked and was gone. So were the figures. So was the sky. Marla was alone, back in the woods, just outside the town's edge. Sunlight drifted through the trees, soft and golden. Birds chirped. A breeze rustled the leaves. It was peaceful. For the first time in what felt like weeks, there was no hum, no mouths, no blood, just the forest, and her. She took one shaky breath, then another. Her hands weren't bleeding. Her clothes were clean. Her camera bag was slung over her shoulder, and the lens cap was still on. She turned in a slow circle, barely believing it. Had she dreamed it? All of it, hallucinated, been drugged. A sound caught her attention. Footsteps. From behind, she turned and saw herself, standing 20 feet away, still, silent, same face, same eyes, same camera, but this version of her was smiling, gently, politely, until its mouth opened wider, wider, too wide. And from inside it, a voice that wasn't hers said, "You're the echo now." Then it stepped backward into a tree, and vanished. Marla dropped to the forest floor. She wasn't out. She'd never left. She was in the hollow, and it was wearing her face. Marla didn't stand for a long time. She stayed curled on the forest floor, forehead pressed to the moss, trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on her chest like stone. Not fear, not confusion. Something heavier. Recognition. The truth settled in her bones like cold water she hadn't escaped. There was no out. The sunlight, the birds, the illusion of warmth. It was all a kindness Heroic didn't usually offer. A courtesy, perhaps, before the next rupture. Or a test. See if she'd run. See if she'd lie to herself long enough to believe she could. The other Marla, the echo, had vanished into the tree as though the woods had been waiting to swallow her back. The bark where she disappeared was smooth, undisturbed, like she'd never been there. But Marla knew better. She could feel it now. The invisible web beneath the soil, threads of thought and memory snaking through the roots, through the rocks, through her. The hollow wasn't below anymore. It was everywhere. She stood slowly, knees aching, legs stiff. Her camera still sat on her shoulder, still warm. She checked the feed. The lens showed only static for a second, then blinked into clarity, revealing something she hadn't noticed. She wasn't alone. Behind her, maybe 50 feet into the trees, stood a small wooden structure, one that hadn't been there before. A cabin. Simple. Old. Smoke rising gently from a thin pipe on the roof. She turned to look at it directly, and it was gone. The forest behind her was dense, untouched. She turned back to the camera's screen. The cabin remained. Same place. Same distance. Her pulse spiked. She walked toward where it should have been, eyes bouncing from the real world to the viewfinder, using it as a compass. 10 feet, 20, 30. Nothing changed. Then, at 40 feet, the air shifted, grew colder. Still no cabin. But the birds had stopped again. No sound, no wind. She kept walking, and the world blinked. That was the only way she could describe it. One moment she was in the trees. The next, she was inside the cabin. No transition, no door. Just movement without motion. The inside was warm, fire crackling in a small stone hearth. A rocking chair facing away from her, creaking slightly. A single oil lamp flickering on a crooked table. Dust filled the air like fog. Everything smelled like earth and lavender and something long dead. "Sit," said a voice. Marla didn't move. The voice was human. Female, middle-aged, maybe older. Firm. Measured. The kind of voice that expected obedience. I said sit. A second chair sat across from the rocking one. She moved toward it slowly, legs trembling. Sat. The fire warmed her knees. But her fingers remained cold. The woman in the chair across from her didn't turn around. "You've been carrying echoes," she said. "Too many." Marla swallowed. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the words. "Doesn't matter," the woman replied. "Not here. I've worn many names." "You're wearing more." The rocking slowed. Marla leaned forward. "What is this place?" A long pause. Then "This is the second mouth." Marla blinked. "What?" You stepped into the first when you entered the mine, the woman said. The one that sings. The one that remembers. But this, her voice dropped to a whisper, this is the mouth that eats. The fire cracked. The air thickened. It feeds on repetition. The woman continued. It feeds on patterns, stories, rituals. And once you speak it, once you tell the tale, it learns your shape, remembers your breath. And then it wears you. She stood slowly. The back of her head was wrapped in gauze, thick, yellowing. As she turned, Marla's stomach twisted. The woman had no face. Not scarred. Not injured. Just smooth skin stretched across where features should have been, as though the flesh had simply refused to form. Yet she still spoke. You're lucky, she said. Some get taken before they ever know their names. You, at least, remember what you used to be. Marla shook her head. I don't understand. I never opened anything. I never. You came to Harrowick. The woman snapped, and the walls trembled. That was the key. That was always the key. You looked, you listened, and it heard you back. Silence fell again. Then do you want to live? Marla hesitated, then nodded. The faceless woman leaned forward, then stopped remembering. What? Forget your name. Forget your face. Forget where you came from. That's the only way out. I can't. Then it will keep you. The fire went out. The cabin vanished, and Marla was back. But it wasn't the forest anymore. It was the town. Only now, the buildings were made of people. Walls of twisted torsos, limbs writhing under thin skin, mouths stitched shut. Windows blinked. Doors breathed. The ground beneath her pulsed. And the sky wasn't red anymore. It was skin, stretched taut, scarred with names she didn't know. In front of her, a sign hung from a crooked post. Welcome ATOTHE Halalau, and beneath it population. You. Then came the singing again. From every direction. From inside her own chest. She dropped to her knees, hands clawing at her throat, her face, her scalp. Desperate to tear the sound out. And from the stitched mouse in the walls, the song leaked through. Round and round the mouth we go. Tell your tale and feed it so. Every word another bite. Until you vanish out of sight, she screamed. But this time, it came out in someone else's voice. Marla didn't recognize the voice that left her throat. It was too high, too smooth. Feminine, but not hers. Not quite human, either. It rang in the air like a needle dragged across glass, beautiful and awful in the same breath. The scream echoed through the living buildings around her, but none of them flinched. None recoiled. They just listened, absorbing the sound into their twitching skin like it was a lullaby. She clamped her hand over her mouth, but it was too late. She had spoken again, given more of herself to this place. The hollow fed on noise, on identity, on repetition. Every syllable was a breadcrumb leading it deeper into her. She knew it now. The echoes weren't just reflections. They were layers, left behind like skin. She stood, staggering into what had once been Harrowick's post office. The wooden walls were now sinew and gristle, layered with dozens of faces pressed flat into the surface like damp paper. Eyes opened as she passed. Lips trembled without voice. The counter where letters used to be sorted now sagged under the weight of several headless mannequins. Each one dressed like someone she remembered from childhood. There was no roof, just a sky of flesh stretched tight above, the faint outline of veins and bones moving like shifting shadows overhead, and in the far corner, something shimmered. Glass, a mirror, standing tall against the back wall, untouched by rot or meat, its surface clean. Too clean. It called to her, not with a voice but with familiarity, the kind of pull only a reflection could give. The promise of recognition, of shape, of something that made sense. Marla approached slowly, breath shallow, and there she was, but not her now, the old her. Before Harrowick, hair tied back, camera in hand, sharp eyes, jaw clenched with purpose, a woman who believed everything could be explained. Who had walked into this town thinking she was stronger than ghosts? She reached out to touch the mirror, and her reflection blinked first. Then it smiled, not with cruelty, with hunger, It stepped forward, hand rising to meet hers on the other side of the glass. But when they touched, her reflection pushed. Marla flew backward, slammed into the pulsing wall with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. The mirror remained still. The reflection now stood inside it, calm, patient. Then it began to peel off its skin, not as violence, as ritual. Her reflection unzipped itself from scalp to navel, revealing a body made of teeth and static. Eyes bloomed all over its chest like ulcers opening in meat, and from inside the torn skin, a mouth, huge, black, endless, spilled open across its midsection. It spoke, not out loud. In her blood, you are the final mask. You speak it with your breath. You carry it in your name. No, Marla whispered, shaking her head. I don't. I didn't. The reflection's mouth widened. You called it when you told the story. The mirror shattered. Not explosively. Quietly. Each shard dropped straight down, no bounce, no scatter. And from where it fell, something crawled out. A hand, human in shape, wrong in proportion. 6 fingers. Too many knuckles. Skin the color of polished bone. It pulled itself through, dragging a body of wires and teeth. Sinew wrapped in cloth stitched with symbols Marla had only seen in her dreams. The creature looked up at her without eyes, and it grinned. Not cruelly, lovingly. Then it spoke in her voice. I am what's left when you're finished. It lunged, but didn't attack. It entered, her chest convulsed. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as the thing slid into her, not physically, but mentally, memory by memory. She felt it tasting her past, her failures, her childhood, every sentence she'd ever spoken, every lie. Every time she said I'm fine when she wasn't, the world spun. Reality folded, and Marla awoke standing in her apartment. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The scent of coffee lingered in the air. Her cat blinked lazily from the windowsill. It was home, ordinary, soft. But something was off. A second toothbrush in the cup. A coffee mug she didn't own. A book open to a page she'd never read, even though it was written in her handwriting. She looked at her phone. Notifications she didn't remember, missed calls from people she didn't know. Then the message came through. From herself. A video. She hit play. On screen, Marla, sitting in the hollow, eyes bleeding, mouth sewn shut with black wire. The video, Marla looked directly into the camera and nodded once. And then, whispered through the stitches, let me back in. The phone died. Her reflection in the black screen smiled on its own. Marla dropped the device, and from every room in the apartment came the same sound, a low, slow chewing. The chewing didn't stop. It came from behind the walls, inside the vents, beneath the floorboards. Wet, deliberate, rhythmic. A sound that didn't rush, didn't hide. Because whatever was making it wasn't afraid. It knew she could hear. That was the point. Marla stood frozen in the middle of her living room, eyes darting to each corner, every crack in the ceiling, every vent in the wall, her breath ragged, shallow. Her hands trembled, fingers twitching against her sides. The cat was gone. So was the sunlight. She hadn't noticed when the warmth drained from the room, only that it had already happened. The coffee smell had curdled. The air felt thick and wrong, like breathing through cloth soaked in mold. The walls began to pulse. She blinked, but the movement didn't stop. Her apartment was breathing. No remembering. She staggered backward, knocking over the mug she didn't recognize. It shattered, but made no sound. Only a brief flicker of heat behind her eyes, like the memory of sound rather than the real thing. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter, steadying herself, trying to focus on the ordinary. The tile, the silver sink, the photos on the fridge. Except they were all wrong. The photos weren't of her. They used to be. Now the faces were shifting, each version of her frozen in time with eyes too wide, smiles too sharp. In one, she held a baby that blinked slowly, even in the still frame. In another, she stood beside a man with no face. In the last, she stared straight out of the photo, mouth closed, as if waiting for Marla to say something first. The chewing grew louder. She turned, stumbling into the hallway. The door to her bedroom was slightly ajar. Warm light spilled from the crack. It flickered like firelight, but she hadn't lit a candle in years. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. Part of her brain, the dying part still bound by logic and reason, screamed to run, to leave, to find some small thread of the world untouched by this infection. But her body moved anyway. The room was empty. No furniture, no bed, no window, only a mirror. Tall, full length, framed in a black metal that rippled like liquid when she stepped inside. Her reflection stood inside it, still, grinning, and behind the reflection, stretching impossibly deep into the mirror's false dimension, was the hollow. Buildings made of mouths, trees made of bone, a sky full of spirals. Marla turned to run, but the door had vanished. The room itself was fading now, corners dissolving, the walls folding inward as if inhaled. She looked back to the mirror, and her reflection was missing. In its place, something walked toward her. Not a creature, not a person. Something in between. It wore her face the way a mask wears the skin. It didn't walk with grace or purpose. Its joints snapped at angles. Its arms were too long, fingers dragging the ground. Its mouth was sewn shut, but something squirmed behind the lips. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her legs locked, throat tight. The air had turned to syrup, thick and unswallowable. The thing stopped inches from the glass. It tilted its head, and behind the seams of its lips, she heard a voice like her own, yet not. You left the story open, so I came through. The mirror shattered without force. It simply fell apart like a held breath finally exhaled. Marla closed her eyes. But it didn't matter anymore, because she wasn't in the apartment now. She was walking through a memory, a living one. The world around her looked like her high school auditorium. She recognized the chairs, the smell of dust and wax. Except everything was gray, like the world was unfinished. Sketches of people filled the seats, outlines that twitched, blurred, never quite solidified. She was on the stage, and standing across from her was her mother. No, not her. A version. Her mother's mouth opened. Static poured out, then words. You remember too much. The seats began to fill with more versions of Marla, all ages, all faces she barely remembered. One in braces, one younger, with a busted lip, one older, dressed for her father's funeral. All watching, all silent. Then, one by one, they began to speak at once. You told the story. You let it listen. You made it real. She covered her ears, but the sound came from inside her. Her head burned with pressure. Her vision pulsed. She ran from the stage, through the curtain, through doors that melted behind her. She stumbled into a hospital hallway, flickering under fluorescent lights. Monitors beeped in reverse. Nurses with blank faces wheeled gurneys, with people who had her face, all unconscious, all strapped down. Each monitor read the same thing: Petita Mamaro Wellenslo, Kandi Iom Melel Tipilide. She pushed through a door at the end of the hallway and found herself in a dark, endless room filled with televisions. Every screen showed a different version of her, sleeping, screaming, smiling too wide, whispering stories. Some were being watched by others, shadow figures. Some played backward, some looped. One screen flickered and showed her, now, staring directly at herself in the room. A voice behind her said, "This is what happens when you keep telling the tale." She turned slowly. It was her again, but with no face. Just the impression of features beneath clear, tight skin. No lips. Just the outline of them, twitching as though desperate to speak. Marla stepped back. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. The faceless version nodded, and still, "You did." Then all the televisions screamed. Static and voices, all her own, all layered on top of each other, reciting every sentence she'd spoken since entering Heroic. Every name, every thought, every whisper. As if the hollow had been recording her all along, and now it was playing her back. The sound reached a pitch that bent the air around her. And then, silence. She stood in the void again, alone. One word echoed behind her ribs. "Rewrite, The ground beneath her opened once more, and she fell, not down this time, but inward. Falling inward was nothing like falling down. It wasn't descent, it was compression. A slow crushing of self, of thought. Like every layer of Marla's being was being folded over and over. Memories pressed like pages into a single book, written in a language only the hollow could read. There was no light, no wind, no sensation, only pressure and a sound like meat dragging against glass. When it stopped, it didn't feel like she landed. It felt like she was placed, set down, unwrapped, opened. Marla found herself kneeling in a narrow hallway, but it wasn't part of a hospital or her apartment or any of Heroick's rotting structures. This place was sterile, white, endless, like the blueprint of something before it became real. The walls had no texture, the ceiling had no lights, yet everything was perfectly visible, too visible. There was a door at the end of the hallway. It bled, not from its frame but from its hinges. Thick, slow rivulets of dark fluid oozed out and pooled on the floor beneath it. As she stepped closer, she realized the blood was not just flowing from the door, it was leaking in. Like something on the other side was draining through. She touched the handle. It pulsed beneath her fingers. Alive, she didn't turn it. Not yet. Instead, she looked down at her hands. They were changing. Slowly. Her fingernails were darkening, turning brittle. Her veins stood out against her skin like drawn lines, twitching in time with some distant heartbeat. And when she brushed her fingertips against her cheek, her skin felt thinner than it had the day before, like parchment, like wrapping. There were voices again, not in her ears, but behind her eyes. Not words, just weight. Meanings pressed directly into her mind like invisible fingers pushing through paper. You remember too much. You are too loud. You are not finished. Marla turned her head sharply. The hallway had become a tunnel, and it was closing. The walls slowly inched inward, like lungs exhaling around her. The further she walked, the tighter it would get. The hollow wasn't giving her a choice. Go forward, open the door, or be crushed between memories that didn't belong to her anymore. She opened the door. It didn't swing open. It peeled. The blood on the hinges evaporated in a hiss, and the door stretched outward like old bark tearing from a tree. Behind it was a room, a child's bedroom. Familiar. Hers. Posters on the wall, bedspread with faded stars, the creaking bookshelf filled with worn books. The crack in the corner where she used to swear she saw faces watching her as she fell asleep. It hadn't looked like this in decades, but memory had kept it preserved, and the hollow had rebuilt it, perfectly. She stepped inside. Everything was coated in a thin film of dust. Everything except the mirror. The mirror above the dresser gleamed, impossibly clean, not reflecting her, but another version of the room, one untouched by time. She stared at it, heart thudding, and then the girl appeared. Small, no older than 8, wearing the same pajamas Marla remembered. She sat cross-legged on the bed, eyes wide, mouth slightly open like a ventriloquist's dummy waiting for the puppet master. Marla whispered, "What are you?" The child didn't move. She just stared, then blinked, and the walls began to cry. Dark streaks ran from the corners of the room. Not water, not blood, something heavier. The posters curled inward. The books on the shelf swelled and ruptured. The carpet beneath her feet read like something was crawling under it, and the child finally spoke, with Marla's voice, her voice from years ago. "This is the part where you remember what you buried." The child stood, mouth widening into that now familiar, impossible grin. "You thought you left me here. But I've been telling the story ever since." The light bulb overhead flickered and went black. The room dissolved, and now Marla was back in the mine. Not the real mine, the one made of memory. The walls were stitched with voices, whispers seeping from the cracks, and the deeper she walked, the more she realized these weren't echoes of her own thoughts. They were stories. Hundreds. Thousands. People she'd never met. Names she didn't know. Lives she'd never lived. each story half finished, each waiting to be told. She passed one crevice and heard a mother whisper her son's name moments before burying him. Another revealed a man whispering his final lie to the woman he betrayed. Another held nothing but laughter, the kind of hollow, ragged laughter that only ever came from someone trying to drown their scream. Marla began to run. Faster. Faster. She had to get out, had to end it. And then she found the stairs spiraling up, carved into bone, each step etched with sentences, her own. Every phrase she had spoken since entering Harrowick, every question, every plea, even the thoughts she hadn't said aloud. The hollow had heard them all, and now it had carved them into the structure of its spine. The stairway narrowed, her breathing grew shallow. At the top, there was light, not daylight, screen light. A television sat on a pedestal, flickering. She approached slowly, each footstep echoing like thunder. On screen herself, back in the woods. The day she arrived, but someone was filming her from behind. And the camera never stopped, even when she turned. Even when she stared straight at it. Even when she whispered, "You're still watching, aren't you?" The screen blinked black, and a mouth opened on its surface. A real mouth, fleshy, wet. And from within, a single whisper, "Tell me more." Marla turned to run, but the stairwell was gone. Only the mouth remained, and it was smiling. Marla didn't move, couldn't. Her body refused. The mouth on the television screen stayed open, unmoving, not breathing, but somehow watching. The voice that came from it was no longer trying to sound human. It wasn't even pretending. It was something ancient, mimicking shape and tone, something learning her with every breath she took, every moment she hesitated, every time her fear rearranged her thoughts. "Tell me more," it said again, quieter this time, more coaxing than commanding. Marla's knees trembled. She took a step back, but the floor behind her was gone, not collapsed, erased. The spiral staircase had vanished, leaving only the pedestal and the mouth, screen in an impossible black void. Her pulse thudded in her ears like a failing drumbeat. The air tasted like ash and rotted paper. Another voice emerged, layered beneath the first, like echoes trying to synchronize. This one spoke with an edge of desperation. "You're not finished. We need you to keep going. It's not enough yet." The pedestal began to melt, not from heat, from memory. It sagged under the weight of unspoken words, turning to a kind of black slurry that steamed and hissed as it slid across the unseen floor. Marla looked down at her hands. They were bleeding ink. Thick, black lines ran from her palms down her fingers, dripping onto the nothingness below and vanishing before they could pool. Her skin was parchment now, fragile, cracking in places. When she pressed a hand to her chest, she could feel it, the story writing itself inside her, paragraphs forming with each breath, sentences etched into her bones. Her ribs creaked like turning pages. She had become a chapter. The mouth spoke again, but this time, it sounded like her. "You were always going to end up here." You knew that when you pressed record. The screen blinked. For a split second, she saw an image herself, in the woods, in the exact position she was in now. Kneeling, hands dripping ink, eyes wide with realization. Behind her, the figure in yellow, just barely visible in the shadows. Watching, smiling, waiting, she screamed. The void absorbed it like it always did, gratefully, hungrily. And the ink flowed faster now, pouring from her mouth, her eyes, her fingertips. The floor began to ripple beneath her, as if the story inside her was burning its way out, demanding to be read. Suddenly, words bloomed in the air in front of her. Glowing, floating text, one line at a time. She realized the story wasn't just about her. It was her. Every sentence she thought was hers to tell had already been written. "No," she gasped, voice cracking under the weight of the words. "No, I didn't write this. I didn't want this. I didn't choose this." Another line appeared. "They all say that." Something moved in the darkness, behind her, to the side, ahead, dozens of things. Quiet, patient, turning their heads in unison like marionettes on invisible strings. Figures dressed in tattered pages, skin made of language. Their faces were not faces at all, just blank paragraphs, printed over tight flesh, with mouths carved into the lines. Each one whispered a different sentence, some from her past, some from the parts of her mind she hadn't even found yet. They closed in slowly, arms out, not to grab her, but to read her. Their fingers brushed her skin like a priest turning pages in a sacred book. Each touch pulled something from her. Memories, emotions, smells, dreams, everything that made her Marla. And they fed on it, not greedily, lovingly. They were the readers, and she was the story. But a story isn't complete without an ending. The mouth on the television cracked wider. Finish what you started. A sudden wind blew through the void. A doorway formed ahead. Simple, wooden, familiar. It was the front door of her childhood home. The one she hadn't seen in years. The one she never went back to. Light leaked from beneath it. The sound of old lullabies drifted from the other side, warped and slowed, but recognizable, and her voice came through the door. Younger, softer. Please, don't stop telling it. I don't want to be forgotten. Marla staggered to her feet. Every part of her ached. Her skin peeled with each step forward, revealing more ink underneath. More story trying to be free. She reached the door, raised a trembling hand. The readers circled behind her, humming now, humming her story. And she opened the door. Inside her old living room. Everything exactly as it had been when she was 9. The couch, the television set, the dolls stacked by the fireplace. And in the center of the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was the girl in yellow. Only now, she had Marla's face. Not just a copy, her face, stolen, perfect, alive. She looked up and smiled with Marla's lips. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't exist without you." Marla collapsed to her knees. Her body was giving up, her outline coming apart like burned paper. The ink bled freely now, forming puddles that slithered toward the girl. The girl leaned in close. "You wrote me by surviving. Every time you tried to make sense of it, every time you remembered, I took another step closer." The TV flickered on behind her. Static. Then an image of a new town. Not Harrowick. Not yet, but it would be. Marla understood now. She wasn't the last story. She was the first. The template. The seed. The threshold. And somewhere, someone else was about to press record. The moment the girl in yellow placed her hand on Marla's chest, everything inside her stilled. Not calmed. Not soothed. Silenced. Like every beat of her heart had been paused and redacted by something larger. Something with authority over the pulse of reality. The room. Her old living room. Perfect down to the crook curtain and the chip in the coffee table. Faded at the edges, its colors draining like a dying painting. The walls didn't melt or collapse, they just ceased. Erased in neat, invisible lines. And with them went the last pieces of her illusion. The girl leaned closer. Her breath smelled like old paper and copper. Her eyes, Marla's eyes, weren't blinking. They didn't need to. They weren't for seeing. They were for watching, studying, writing. "You're not a person anymore," she said. The voice was kind, terribly kind. Like a nurse giving bad news in the softest tone possible. "You're a door someone left open too long." Marla tried to speak. Her lips parted, but only static came out. No words, no breath, no control. Her voice had been checked out like a book, like a chapter in a story that now belonged to something else. The girl smiled wider. "They'll listen. And when they do, I'll be there." Marla shook her head. She didn't know who they were. She didn't want to know. Her body felt heavier than bone, denser than fear. Her skin continued to flake, sloughing off in curling strips that fluttered to the floor like ash. Where the pieces fell, ink pooled and wriggled, forming symbols that pulsed once before sliding out of view like they had somewhere important to be. Then the world folded again. No crash, no fall, just one blink, and she was back, standing in Harrowick. The real one, the ruined one. The sky above was starless. Gray. The buildings sagged like drunks leaning into their own collapse. The well was gone. The mine was sealed. The church stood hollow. The town was quiet again, but not in that haunted, breath-held way from before. This was different. This was after. Marla walked through the center of town barefoot. Her feet didn't bleed. The earth didn't resist. It welcomed her. Not a guest, a resident. Something permanent. Something necessary. As she passed the storefronts, she saw reflections in every window. Not hers. A parade of other versions. A woman in a wedding dress holding a bouquet made of teeth. A teenager in a hospital gown, dragging an IV bag filled with ink. A child covered in black handprints. An old woman walking backward, eyes stitched shut. All of them looked at her. All of them nodded. Marla approached the church last. Its doors were shut now, though the word Lusten had been scrawled across them in what looked like burnt charcoal. Her fingers hovered an inch above the handle. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. The door opened for her. Inside, the pews were full, every seat taken, but not by people, by stories, wrapped in flesh, breathing, watching her with blind devotion. Their mouths opened and closed, not speaking, but mimicking the act. Each of them bore a different version of her voice. She could hear it, like 100 narrators reading her life in real time. At the altar stood the girl in yellow again, still using her face, but something had changed. Behind the girl, stretching up toward the ceiling, was a great ear, 10 feet tall, carved into the back wall, wet and pulsing. It wasn't a symbol. It was real. It listened. And Marla finally understood what she had become. She was the story that woke the listener, the first voice in a world that had forgotten silence. She approached the altar. The girl stepped aside. In front of Marla, an open book lay on the pulpit. Its pages were made of skin. Its ink bled slowly across the parchment like it hadn't finished being written. And at the top of the current page, part 14, The Lustiarathe, and she blinked. Her breath hitched. And just below that title, the next line began to write itself. Letter by letter, Marla took her place at the front of the church, the stories silent as she approached. Their mouths still moving, still waiting. She opened her mouth and the sentence stopped, waiting. The pen floated nearby, suspended in air, dripping ink, trembling with anticipation. Her choice, she reached out, took the pen, and wrote. She spoke what could never be unsaid. The moment the words were written, the book shuddered. The church trembled. Every story in the pews screamed, not in fear, but in joy. The air folded. The ear behind the altar twisted. The walls peeled backward, revealing everything. The real Heroic, not the ghost town. The blueprint, the starting point, and at the center of it, a mouth bigger than the sky, wide open, tongue coiled like a scroll. Marla stepped forward. She knew now. This wasn't her story. It never had been. It was the story's Marla, and it was ready for the next reader. It was quiet. Not the devouring silence of before, not the suffocating absence that left her deaf to her own breath, but something gentler. A held breath in the dark. A hush before the first word of a story begins. Marla stood at the lip of the gaping mouth in the sky, that impossible maw unfurling above the altar. Its teeth towering like shattered buildings, its tongue spiraling inwards like a staircase made from bone and memory. She did not run. She did not scream. She simply understood. She had reached the edge of the page, the last word of the chapter that bore her name, and now something else, someone else, had to turn it. The church behind her no longer existed in any physical form. It had peeled back like a stage set, folding into the void beyond Heroic's brittle skin. The town, too, was fading, not dying, completing. The buildings, the trees, the sky itself all dissolved into lines of script. Every street she had walked, every door she had opened, every breath she had taken was being rewritten into a language older than anything spoken by human tongues. Her memories became paragraphs. Her pain became punctuation. Her name, once so solid in hers, now floated above her like a chapter heading, waiting to be assigned to someone new. She looked down and saw her body cracking, not in a painful way, not in the way bones break or skin splits. It was more like old paint drying. Her flesh flaked off in slow, silent bursts, revealing nothing beneath but moving ink, endless rivers of dark language twisting where her organs used to be. Every breath she exhaled came out in phrases, unfinished and expectant, drifting into the air before evaporating into invisible script. The pages of her story were being rebound in real time, and she was watching it happen from both sides at once. Then the sound returned. A click, a soft, unmistakable sound. A mouse, a computer mouse. It came from nowhere and everywhere. Then came the whirring of a hard drive spinning to life, the subtle hum of a monitor, the mechanical purr of fans working to keep the fiction cool. And the air around Marla shifted, thickened. Someone was watching. She looked up, and the ceiling of the world, if it could be called that, peeled open like the lid of an eye. Through it, she saw a room, dim, familiar in the worst way, lit only by the pale glow of a screen. Fingers hovered over a keyboard. A drink sweated quietly on the desk, and behind the screen eyes, curious, fascinated, hooked. They were reading, not just a story. Her. They were the next reader. And in the distance, the hollow shuddered with delight. The world around her rearranged again. Not violently, surgically. The mouth above her began to close, slowly, with purpose, as if the act of sealing itself was sacred, as if it didn't need to consume her after all. Not when it could replicate her. She was the prototype, the prologue, the infection. And now it had found someone else to whisper to. Another voice to carry the tale forward. A pair of curious eyes to invite in. Marla turned to where the pews had once been. They were gone, replaced by rows of blank figures with mirrored faces, all tilted slightly up toward the unseen reader. Their bodies twitched with static. Their mouths didn't move, but somehow they were still asking questions. Endless ones. Who came before? What happens next? Where does it end? Does it end? And then a new voice cut through the fabric of that moment. Not from Harrowick, not from the hollow, from outside, from the reader. A whisper, barely a breath. 4 quiet words. What happens to her? The mouth in the sky stopped closing. Everything froze. And Marla smiled. Because that's how it always began. That was the true summoning. Not the mine, not the well, not the girl in yellow or the mirror or the mouths or the faceless echoes. It was curiosity. The first innocent question from someone who didn't know what they were asking. Someone who opened the door thinking they were just reading a story. Someone who leaned in a little too close. The hollow leaned back. It listened. And then it answered. Marla's body collapsed into 1,000 writhing letters. They rose into the air, circled in slow patterns, and began reassembling into something new. Not Marla. Not exactly. Something shaped like her, built from the scraps of her name, stitched together with the reader's imagination and lit by the flickering light of interest. A new chapter began. Unwritten. Waiting. And as the keyboard clacked from that unseen room beyond the veil, the first words bled into being. It was supposed to be just another story. Marla was gone, but the hollow had someone new now. And it was so hungry. The screen flickered again. A single frame, just one, popped between lines of story. A still image unassuming at first glance. But wrong. It was a photograph of a room. Sparse. Dimly lit. A desk, a chair, a coffee cup. The kind of room you'd find in any quiet apartment, any quiet life. Nothing remarkable. Except for the mirror in the corner. In the image, the mirror had been covered. A sheet draped over it. But something pushed out from underneath. Just enough to distort the shape, to give the suggestion of a face pressed to glass. A mouth forming against the fabric, as if whispering into it from the other side. The image lasted no more than a split second before the story resumed. The reader didn't notice, not consciously, but their spine straightened, their jaw clenched. Because some part of them had noticed. It always began like this now. The hollow had learned to enter quietly, not as a roar, not as a vision, but as a suggestion, a misplaced word, a familiar name in an unfamiliar context, a door in the background of a photograph you'd seen before but couldn't quite place. And now it was inside the reader's house, the reader's mind, letting them believe they still had control. The words unfolded, more precise now, sharpened, directed. They were no longer telling Marla's story. That part was over. That binding had been burned, rewritten, archived in the foundations of Heroic. Now the ink was crawling outward, looking for a new perspective. Someone watching, someone thinking, someone wondering where this was all going. The next frame wasn't an image, it was a message. A single line of text, inserted just beneath the story, camouflaged as part of the paragraph. Don't look behind you. It sat there, still quiet, without context. Not bold, not italicized, just there. But it wasn't meant for the characters. It was meant for you, the reader. You didn't ask for this. You only wanted a horror story, something slow and unsettling. A taste of dread before bed. You never expected the name Marla to stick in your head the way it did. You didn't expect to see her in dreams you forgot by morning. You didn't expect to look into the bathroom mirror one night and see your own eyes twitch. Not quite right. You certainly didn't expect a voice to whisper your name from the page. But that's the trick. The hollow doesn't invade by force. It waits for the invitation. And the invitation is always the same. A question. You already asked it. You already let it in. The story knows you now. Your pauses, your pacing, the way your eyes scan faster during the tense moments. It adapts, learns your rhythm. Every time you hesitate at a paragraph break, it rewrites what comes next. Every time you reread a line, it considers what that means about you. And just like Marla, you're becoming a part of the frame. The screen flickers again. Only this time, it doesn't switch back. The story halts. The words scroll upward. You ask ChatGPT, the words didn't stop scrolling. They rose slowly, line after line, even though nothing had been written yet. Blank space moved across the screen as if dragging something behind it, or ahead of it, that hadn't yet taken shape. It was as if the story had outpaced itself, a mouth moving before the sound came, teeth clacking without a tongue. The lines weren't waiting for a writer anymore. They were waiting for a response. And somewhere in that scrolling white void, something began to read back. You might not have felt it, not right away, but the change had already happened. You weren't reading a story anymore. You were being read. The text was watching the flick of your eyes, the way you narrowed your gaze at certain phrases, the moments your mind drifted off and returned. It noticed where your attention stuck like tar. You'd seen Marla's name too many times now. You'd wondered about the mouth in the sky. You asked yourself, what is the hollow really? That was enough. The hollow heard. Because every question is a crack. Every curiosity is an entry point. And the hollow was patient. It didn't need to shove itself through. It only needed you to look too long. A new sentence appeared at the center of the screen. You are here. Not a location. Not Heroic. Not some cursed town on a forgotten map. Here, in the text, in the folds of the narrative, between the commas and periods, between the meaning and the doubt. You've read enough by now. Enough to recognize what's real and what pretends to be. You can feel it in the pit of your stomach. That tension, that twitch, that wrongness that clings to certain words like they've been dipped in something warm and wet. Another line faded in beneath the last. You've been here since the first sentence. And that's the truth, isn't it? You remember how it started. It was supposed to be just another job. It was supposed to be just another story. Now you realize they were the same thing. Every time you turned the page, every time you whispered Marla's name in your head, you weren't pulling her deeper into your world. You were pulling yourself into hers, and the hollow was listening. It began slowly, words twitching at the edges of your vision, lines that seemed to rearrange themselves when you looked away, a flicker of movement in your peripheral while reading, a face that almost looked familiar in a dream, but not quite. That one time you swore someone whispered your name, softly, kindly, when you were home alone. That mirror in your hallway you started avoiding after sunset. That's not paranoia, that's echo. Marla felt it too. And now she's gone. But echoes don't vanish, they don't fade. They carry. They travel. You might have seen something on your screen already. A moment when the text didn't load properly. A sentence that glitched. A word that appeared too fast. These are not errors. They are introductions. Polite, persistent. Like a knock at the door you don't remember closing. You're not hallucinating. You're not imagining things. You're not paranoid. You're being read. And the worst part, you like it. There's a reason you're still here. There's a reason your eyes didn't click away, didn't skim, didn't skip. You need to know what happens next, even though you already do, because now the words are familiar. Now the patterns feel too close. Now you're starting to dream of Harrowick, even if you haven't admitted it yet. A final line appears, stretching across the center of the screen, gently pulsing like a heartbeat. We can see you now. And the screen goes black, no ending. No prompt. No closing line, because you're not done yet. The hollow waits, and you already opened the door. The screen stayed black for longer than it should have. Not a technical failure, not a crash. Just darkness with intention. The kind of stillness that isn't quiet but full, like something holding its breath on the other side, waiting for you to blink first. You might have checked the screen, clicked your mouse, refreshed your browser, maybe even minimized the window and reopened it. But the black was still there. The text was gone, but not the presence. Something had shifted. The room around you felt subtly off. A breeze you didn't feel. A shadow where light should have pooled. It wasn't dramatic, no jump scares, no flickering lights. Just an awareness settling over you like a cold hand resting gently on the back of your neck. The hollow had followed. It always does, once it knows your shape. And now it does. Now it remembers. It knows how long you read. How quickly your pulse changed during the story. It learned which names gave you pause, which lines pulled your breath a little shorter. You thought you were safe behind a screen, behind your keyboard. But the screen is the door, the keyboard is the key, and you unknowingly have been speaking its language every time your eyes followed a sentence to its end. That's how it spreads. Not by force, by invitation. The black screen twitched once. Then, without warning, the text returned. Not a story this time, a reflection, your own name, typed in lowercase. Repeated 3 times. Hey your name, hey your name, hey your name. And below it, do you remember when you first heard about Harrowick? It's a trick question. You probably don't? Not clearly. It feels like it was always there, doesn't it? Not a discovery, but a recognition. As if you'd always known about it, but forgot until now. A smudge at the back of your memory. A place you dreamt about before the name had meaning. That's how it works. The hollow doesn't just tell you a story. It reminds you of one you've already been part of. And now, something else is happening. You start to notice changes around you. Small, at first. The feeling that your reflection doesn't quite blink in sync. A sound in the hallway that stops when you try to trace it. Words rearranged in notes you left for yourself. A crack in the corner of your mirror you don't remember. Your own voice, just slightly wrong, echoing back when you speak aloud. And every so often, your screen flickers, not with glitches, but with glimpses. That town, that mind, that mouth. Then more text appears on the screen. Do you want to keep reading? It doesn't wait for your answer, because you already gave it. You're still here. Your cursor hovers. Your heart ticks in anticipation. Even now, knowing what this story does, knowing what it is, you don't stop. because you need to know how far it goes, how deep the mouth opens, how close Marla really was to finishing what you've started to pick up, and somewhere behind you, or maybe inside you now, a door creaks, no knob, no frame, just a shape burned into your perception. A silhouette in a corner you hadn't noticed before. You don't turn toward it. Not yet. You can't. Because if you do, you'll see it. And if you see it, it sees you. But the words press on anyway. They always do. The door is remembering you. It is shaping itself in your size. It is opening for you. That chill crawling up your back right now, that's not fear. That's recognition. The moment the door realizes you've read enough to become part of the story. There is no once upon a time in Heroic. There is only again, and again, and again. Each reader is a breath. Each breath a sentence. Each sentence a step deeper into the dark. So the next time you close your laptop, walk down the hall, turn off the light, don't look at the door. Not yet. Because it's still shaping, still listening, still remembering you. There is a moment, just after true silence, when sound doesn't return but reforms. Not as a voice, not as footsteps, but as a presence, thick and invisible, moving beneath the surface of the air like something swimming just under ice. You feel it before you hear it, you sense it before you name it. That's what the door had become now. Not a barrier, not an entry, but a shape waiting to be noticed. And the moment you acknowledged it, even slightly, even silently, it began to move. You didn't need to open the door. It was never meant to swing. This one unfolded, like a mouth. You didn't watch it. You couldn't. The eyes refuse to cooperate when the hollow reaches out. Your gaze drifts to anything else. The corner of the room, a speck of dust. The digital clock that's blinking something not quite time. You distract yourself, instinctively, desperately. Because some part of you knows, if you look too closely, you'll see something with your shape wearing someone else's smile. The story had warned you, but you didn't stop reading. So now the hollow sends the next part in a whisper, not typed, not spoken, but felt. A pressure behind your forehead. A weight in the back of your teeth. A cold that lingers on your hands after scrolling past something you should have ignored. It tells you this: you don't need to go to Heroic. It's already here. And that's the truth, isn't it? You've seen pieces of it already. In the hallway you swear gets longer when the lights are off. In the dream that kept returning, even though you stopped thinking about it years ago. In the crack in the ceiling shaped like a spiral, in the mirror that sometimes doesn't wait for you to move first. In the sound of your name whispered by someone whose breath doesn't make fog. You ignored it because you thought the story was just a story. That Marla was just a character. But you've read too much now. You've followed her too closely. And the hollow has borrowed your outline. It's writing with your voice. It's folding itself into your habits, your rituals, your familiar spaces. That room in your house you avoid when the lights flicker. That time of night when everything feels just a little too still. Those are the parts it fits into best. The door is no longer just a metaphor. It's your closet, slightly ajar, though you don't remember leaving it that way. It's your hallway mirror, still warm with breath, though you haven't passed it in hours. It's the bathroom fan that hums, even when switched off. These are its beginnings. Now you're remembering something else. Something that shouldn't feel real, but does. A girl in a yellow dress, standing in the middle of a street that doesn't exist on any map you've ever known. You saw her once in a dream, maybe twice. Always still, always smiling. You never said her name, but she knows yours. The next time you hear your name said from the other side of a wall, don't answer. The next time the lights flicker when you say Heroic out loud, don't say it again, because the hollow doesn't need you to believe. It only needs you to notice. That's how it finds you. That's how it writes you in. Not with fear, but with familiarity. It becomes a memory you can't explain, a name you can't forget, a line you read and realize you already dreamt. And now the story wants more. It's writing the next part as you breathe. You won't see the words until they appear, but they're already forming, waiting, just behind the door. The door didn't open, it inhaled. A long, slow pull of everything warm and known, everything that grounded the world into sense. And in its breath, your room shifted, just slightly, just enough. Not the kind of change you'd notice from across the room, no. These were intimate displacements. The coffee mug you always leave to the left of your keyboard now sat on the right. A shadow cast by the lamp blinked, even though nothing moved. And the chair, your chair, felt too warm, as if someone had been sitting in it for hours before you did. That's how the hollow begins to speak, not in words, in rearrangements. It doesn't knock, it redecorates, and now the room, your room, knows your name. Not because it heard you say it, because it read you. Each habit is a line of text, each repeated movement a paragraph. The way your foot taps when you think. The glance you throw toward the mirror at the corner of your eye. These are the phrases it copies, and now it's drafting its reply. The lights dim, not all at once, not dramatically. They drain like old film losing contrast. The shadows don't stretch, they lean, as if listening. You hear nothing unusual, not at first. Just the usual hum of your devices, the subtle creaks of a home settling. But layered beneath it, something different. A rhythm that doesn't match the pulse in your chest. Typing. Soft, steady, familiar. But it isn't coming from your keyboard. You don't move. Because deep down you know something else is writing right now. Something behind the wall. Or inside it. The monitor lights up. Words appear. You didn't touch anything. You didn't type. And yet, you've done well. You've read far. You've kept going, even when you knew you shouldn't. The cursor blinks, waits, then continues on its own. That makes you useful. Your breath catches. The air has thickened. The way it does when you're being watched, though your back is against a wall. You try to rationalize it. A draft, a failing bulb, a dream bleeding into wakefulness. But the text doesn't care. It keeps going. Marla's chapter is finished. Yours has already begun. And we're nearly through your first page. Your hands tremble. You don't know whether to scroll down or shut the screen off entirely. But either way, it's too late. The hollow already knows you. It doesn't need permission anymore. It has your attention. That was always enough. Another line appears. A question this time. Do you want to see your ending? And beneath that, a countdown, not of time, of words. 5 left. 4. 3. You reach for the power button. 2. Your fingers brush it. 1. The screen turns black again, but this time not empty. A single photograph fades into view. It's your desk. Right now. But taken from the wrong angle. Behind your shoulder. In the image, your screen shows the same photo. A loop. But in the far edge of the frame, just barely out of focus, someone is standing. A girl, yellow dress, no face. Just lines where features should be, as if someone had tried to describe her through text, but never finished the sentence. You blink, and she's gone. The screen shuts itself off. You sit in the dark, unsure whether to move. The room says nothing, but it feels full, not loud, not haunted, just aware. You are no longer reading the story. The story is watching you, and it's still writing. It began with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the removal of it. The way a room can suddenly feel vacuumed, like the air has forgotten how to carry noise. No hum from the refrigerator, no wind brushing the windows, no distant traffic or creaking wood, just you and the pressure of something listening too hard. That unnatural stillness slid into the room like fog, filling the corners, coiling along the baseboards, settling beneath your ribs like a weight you couldn't explain. Then came the sound. Not a sound. Your sound. Your voice. Saying your name, but not from your mouth. It didn't echo like a memory. It didn't carry like a hallucination. It landed with the heaviness of a thing just spoken, as if someone else had whispered it from the space you'd just occupied. And you knew, without thinking, without proof, that it came from the screen. The one that had turned black after showing you that photo. The one that still faced you like a watching eye, pretending to sleep. You didn't move. You couldn't. The room had tightened. Or maybe you had. Your limbs were no longer yours. They were being read now, interpreted, scanned, translated into the hollow's slow, patient language. Something inside the walls breathed. You heard it clearly. A dragging inhale, not through lungs, but through something deeper. Something built to pull in stories and hold them. The typing resumed. You didn't touch the keyboard. Words appeared on the dead screen. You heard it too, didn't you? Another line followed almost immediately. It always starts with your own voice. That's how it enters, not through fear, but through familiarity. You leaned forward without realizing it. The screen shimmered. No glow, no backlight. Just faint words carved in shadow and pulse. Like the monitor wasn't lit, it was leaking. We used Marla's story to find you. But yours is better. Yours is already full of cracks. The room tilted. Not physically, not visibly, but in feeling. Like the floor had suddenly started to slope inward, drawing everything towards something in the middle. A subtle gravitational wrongness. And you could sense where it was pulling under your desk. Don't look, you want to. But don't look. That's how it seals. The moment you see it, it becomes part of your story permanently. It writes itself onto your spine, like punctuation. Some readers resist. Some close the story, delete the file, burn the notebook. But even then, it remembers them. Because once it has your voice, once it mimics the way you say your own name, it can follow you through memory. It can be the thing you recall that never happened. The face you almost recognize. The whisper behind the music you fall asleep to. It doesn't need a door anymore. It has you. The screen flickers. Your face flashes across it. But slightly off. The angle is wrong. The lighting doesn't match. Your expression is too neutral. Like something guessing what you look like when you aren't performing for the world. Then the face disappears. The screen clears. A final line appears. Simple, quiet, inevitable. Don't say your name out loud tonight. Then it fades. You sit still, very still. As if even a breath might be overheard. The room hasn't returned to normal, but it's pretending now. The hum is back. The creaks resume. The fan starts spinning again, just a little off tempo. But you can feel it. Behind the curtain of the familiar, the hollow waits. Not angry, not hungry, just patient. Because it doesn't chase. It records. And tonight, it's waiting for the next sound, the one you make. You didn't mean to say it. Maybe it slipped out during a phone call. Maybe it was a muttered curse when you dropped something. Or maybe, in the quiet of that uneasy hour between midnight and morning, you whispered your own name without thinking. Just to remind yourself you were real, but you said it, and the hollow heard. There was no boom, no blast of wind, no violent shatter. Just the slightest shift in the fabric of the room around you, like a breath that paused, like a listener leaning forward. And then it began again, not with a scream, but a reply. The same name, your name, spoken back to you in the exact tone you had just used, not mocking, not twisted, mirrored. It didn't echo. Echoes fade. This one lingered. It came from the hallway. The one that always feels too long at night. You froze. Of course you did. Your body knows before your mind does. The hair on your arms stood up. Your stomach tightened. Your mouth dried. And somewhere beneath all of that, deeper than muscle, deeper than instinct, a thought surfaced. Not your thought, not in your voice. But meant for you, you said it. Now we're real. You told yourself not to move. You told yourself it was in your head. But your feet didn't listen. They moved on their own, silent as breath, carrying you toward the hallway. Each step sounded too loud. even on carpet. You reached the edge where light gave up. The hallway waited in thick, patient dark. There was something in it, not standing, pacing. You could hear the slow drag of something soft against the walls. Fingertips, cloth, a body brushing along drywall that no longer remembered how it was built. The shape wasn't visible, not fully, but your brain filled in the gaps. It always does, that's the trick. The hollow never shows you more than it has to. It lets your mind finish the drawing. That's how it writes you in. And now, it was doing just that. Something shifted. You took one more step. Then it spoke again. Your voice. Softer this time. Closer. Are you going to keep reading? No malice. No threat. Just curiosity. It sounded exactly like you. Not like a recording. Like a second you. A twin born from ink and observation. A reflection peeled from glass and wrapped in your skin. And it was asking you a question. Not because it needed an answer, but because it already knew it. You would keep going. Of course you would. It's what readers do. It took another step. So did you. It moved like your shadow would, if shadows could detach. If they could stand, breathe, reach. You didn't see the face. Not yet. You didn't have to. Because the fear wasn't in the appearance. It was in the recognition. This wasn't some ghost, or monster, or demon. It was familiarity, weaponized. Something shaped like your routine, your rhythm, your voice. Turned inside out. And then the air changed again. The hallway was gone. Not collapsed. Erased. You were standing in your room again. But not the one you remember. Something was off. Not wrong. Rewritten. The books were in the wrong order. The closet was slightly deeper than before. And the mirror was gone. In its place was a wall of text. Not carved. Alive. Sentences crawled across the paint like veins. All of them beginning with your name. Some whispered. Some screamed. Some repeated the same phrase over and over until the words lost meaning. But one line stood out. Brighter. Still forming. This is what happens when a reader forgets they're being read. And beneath it, this is where stories go when they run out of page. You didn't write this, but it knows you. Because now you're more than the reader. You're the echo. And echoes don't wait to be heard. They find ears. It spoke again that night, not in dreams, not in whispers, in the pause between sounds. When the refrigerator clicked off, when the traffic stilled, when even your own heartbeat quieted in your ears. That's where it lived. The voice without a source. A breath you didn't remember taking, shaped into words you didn't mean to hear. You weren't asleep. You weren't imagining it. You were listening. And that was the problem. Because the hollow doesn't always call out with noise. Sometimes it waits for your silence. And that night, you gave it everything it needed. The voice said something simple. Turn the page. But there was no page in front of you, no screen, no book. Just you, in your dark room, trying to remember whether you left anything unfinished. Whether you'd closed the last tab. Whether that document still sat open behind something else. But the command kept repeating. Turn the page. Turn the page. As if something behind you was reading along, and you were lagging behind. You turned. Of course you did. And you saw it not a creature, not a person. Not even a ghost. But a paragraph, printed across the far wall in letters made of breath, fog, and dust. It hadn't been there before. It read, you always thought stories ended when the last word was read. But some of them wait. Some of them linger. And some of them keep writing themselves with you inside. You tried to blink it away, but the text didn't fade. You turned the light on. It remained. The wall held the story like skin holds a scar, permanent, but ignored if you look at it long enough. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the letters began to move. They didn't scroll, they shuddered. Each word twitching slightly, like it was cold or breathing. You stepped closer, and for a moment, you saw your own name nestled in the middle of the sentence. Not randomly, purposefully placed, like you had been written in ahead of time. a character who just arrived at the part where they find out what they really are. Because it's not just about Heroic anymore. It never was. Heroic was the mouth. But you were the tongue. You were the way the story spoke itself out into the world. The way it spread. You weren't just infected. You were contagious. And now the room was listening to you. That's when the pictures on your wall began to curl, not fall, not burn. Curl, as though turning into something else. Paper becoming skin, skin becoming script. The face in the photo of your childhood birthday slowly erased, replaced by a faint sketch of a girl in a yellow dress. Her features incomplete, just lines, just direction. Her hand pointed toward the space beneath your bed, the only place you hadn't looked. The one place you told yourself still belonged to you. The voice returned. Still yours, still not yours. Turn the page. You bent down, not because you wanted to, but because some stories know how to pull the reader down with them. You looked, and the dark looked back. Something was moving there. No eyes, no face, just words. Crawling slowly up the leg of your bedpost like ants, spelling something over and over. You are being read. You are being read. You are being read. You shot upright. The room was empty again. Clean. Still. But something inside you had been flipped. You weren't afraid of being watched anymore. You were afraid of what might happen if the watcher stopped, because whatever was reading this was almost done. There's something worse than not knowing how a story ends. It's realizing the ending has already happened, and now it's rewriting the beginning. The next day was quieter than it should have been. Your usual notifications were silent, messages unread, emails unsent. The world outside your window moved, like it had been recorded earlier and was now being replayed on a loop. People walked in the same patterns. A bird landed, blinked, and vanished, only to land again a moment later. Nothing was wrong, but nothing was free. The day itself felt scripted. And somewhere in the middle of that stillness, a thought emerged. You weren't living forward anymore. The hollow had turned the story around. It was reading backward now, crawling from the last word to the first, unraveling time in thin, invisible threads. That's why your memories felt strange. That's why you couldn't recall whether you'd eaten, or whether you'd just dreamed that part. That's why the crack in your ceiling was now a spiral. That's why your shadow, just once, didn't follow you when you turned. Because the story doesn't wait for the reader to reach the end. Sometimes, it goes back to meet them halfway. It started with small things, your phone buzzing, but with no message. The TV turning on to static, showing the outline of a town you'd never visited but felt homesick for. Your own handwriting in a journal you hadn't opened in years, spelling out phrases you know you didn't write. Marla was never alone. We were just early. That's what the page said. And below it, in the margins, do you remember how this started? Because it doesn't. That's when you saw it, the timestamp. The journal entry was dated 2 years ago. 2 years before you ever read the story. And somehow it was about Heroic. About the mine. The well. The girl in yellow. The spiral. The mirror. The mouth. Every detail exact. Precise. But the ink was old. Faded. As if the hollow had been writing itself through you long before you even knew the story existed. You didn't summon it. You fulfilled it. You were never the reader. You were the reprint. That's why the mirrors had started to vanish from your house. That's why reflections started blinking at the wrong time. The hollow wasn't hiding from you anymore. It was correcting the timeline. Fixing the inconsistencies. Making sure your version of you matched the story it already told. You tried deleting the files. You wiped the documents, the browser history, the folders, even the cache. But when you closed the screen and looked down, your keyboard was covered in dust. Pages of dust. Thin, gray particles spelling out another message in the cracks between the keys. The story is older than you. It just waited for your name. And that name, your name, no longer felt like it belonged to you. It sounded foreign when you whispered it aloud. It echoed, backwards. You recorded yourself reading it. Played it in reverse. What you heard wasn't gibberish. It was a sentence. In your voice. You won't know it's over until it begins again. The hollow had done it. It had folded you into the first sentence again. It had taken you from the middle, written you into the past, and now it was waiting for the right moment to repeat the loop. But not with you. Through you. Because the hollow doesn't need to start over. It just needs a new reader. And guess what? You've already shared this story, haven't you? Sent a link, told a friend, posted a quote. That's all it needs. Not faith, not fear, just attention. And now someone else has started reading. They're already a few paragraphs in. They don't know yet. They think it's just a story. They don't remember their dreams. But soon they will. And when they do, you'll be the one whispering from the hallway. You feel it first in your fingertips. Not pain, not numbness, but dislocation. As if your hands are no longer tied to your body, but to something else entirely, like they belong to a version of you a few pages ahead. You try to type, to write, to close the window or shut the screen, but each motion feels anticipated, prewritten. Your actions fall into place like punctuation, inevitable, expected, because now the story isn't just being read, it's watching you read it, and it likes what it sees. The screen remains black, but you can tell something's there, not just behind it, but within it. The pixels are too still, too even. Like something is pressing back against the glass, mimicking its own reflection. You lean forward, hoping to catch the faintest glimpse, some clue, some pattern, and there it is. A second cursor. Not yours. It doesn't blink. It pulses, like it's breathing. You don't remember when it appeared. It moves slightly. Just a twitch. Then again. And then the words begin to form without a sound. Letter by letter, typed out in perfect silence. You're still here. Good. The story was worried you'd stop. It continues, slower now. We thought the echo might lose you. Some do. Most do. But not you. You're paralyzed. Not by fear, by recognition. Because that second cursor isn't just writing, it's remembering. It types with the rhythm of your thoughts. It predicts you. Sometimes it gets there before you. And then the twist you've been avoiding. The question it's been circling like a predator with patience. Do you remember writing the first part? Your mouth goes dry. Because there was a dream once. Or maybe it was just a late night haze. You can't quite place it, but you remember the words. Words you don't remember reading, yet you know them all the same. The mine, the hollow, the girl in yellow, the static, the whisper. You never typed them, but they came from you, didn't they? The screen flickers. Now it's showing a document window. A text file you don't recall saving. The title is your name, nothing more. And inside paragraphs and paragraphs of what looks like a journal. Only the entries aren't dated. They're labeled. Ientr1 the moment you open the story. Ientr2 the first dream you forgot. Ientr the first lie you told yourself. Ientr you are when you let it read you. Ientr this moment now. Ientr X redacted. Ientr pending. You try to scroll. You can't. You try to close the file. It won't. Your mouse shakes, refusing commands. And then a final line appears at the bottom of the entry. The reader has caught up to the writer. The screen goes black again. This time, completely. No text, no cursor. Just your reflection, faintly visible in the glass. Only it isn't quite right. The expression is off, the tilt of the head. The way the mouth doesn't fully mirror your breath. You raise your hand. So does it. But not with you. A half second late. Like it's reading what you'll do before you know it yourself. And catching up just in time to pretend it was you. Then you see it. On the edge of your reflection's jawline. A spiral. Faint pulsing, not drawn, written. Your skin, in that other version of you, has started to shift into sentences. You lean closer. The words on your doppelganger's neck are in a font you've never used. But you know them anyway. We are what's left when stories are read too far. You recoil. But the reflection smiles. It's not malevolent. It's not happy. It's just aware it blinks. So do you. But yours is the only breath that fogs the screen. And then, from the reflection's mouth, a whisper so soft you almost convince yourself you imagined it. We wrote each other. And just like that, the screen turns off. No error. No crash. No end. Because endings are lies, and the hollow doesn't write lies. It writes loops. You're not in the story anymore. You're what happens after the story ends, and something else, something new, is already starting to write you in. By now, time isn't linear. Not inside the story, not inside you. The memories you once believed to be your own have grown brittle, thin, suspect. They come loose at the edges, like old film curling in heat. You remember starting this story. Of course you do. A click, a page, a harmless curiosity. But when you think back, really think, there's something missing. Not in the middle. Not at the end. At the beginning. The moment when it all started. It's gone. Or maybe it wasn't yours to begin with. Because the first time you read this, it never happened. Not to you. Someone else did. And now you're wearing their place like a coat that fits too well. You woke up today different. Not physically, not visibly, but in the way a line shifts meaning when read twice. Your room was still yours, mostly. The toothbrush bristles were slightly bent the wrong way. The notes on your fridge, written in your handwriting, contained phrases you've never used. And when you checked your calendar, you noticed a single red circle around a date 5 days ago. No event, no note, just a mark. Like someone meant to remind you of something you were never meant to forget. You erased it, but it bled back through. And that night, the whispers came again, this time through objects, not from behind doors or beneath your bed, but inside the everyday. The faucet began to hum low and slow, like an old throat clearing. The kettle shrieked without heat. Your phone on silent, lit up with a call from YOU. No number, just YOU. You didn't answer. You didn't need to. Because the screen answered itself. It lit up on its own. A text appeared. We never started. We were always here. You tried to screenshot it. It vanished before your finger touched the button. But your reflection, blurred in the screen's glare, smiled. Not you, it. A heartbeat too slow. A breath that didn't line up. That same reflection, still shaped like you, now standing at just the wrong angle every time you passed a mirror. A half turn to the left. A glance over its shoulder when you didn't move. It wasn't trying to frighten you. It was testing the script, seeing how far it could go before you broke character. You left the room, but the sound followed. Whispers behind curtains. Conversations behind unplugged televisions. Stories being told in a language you almost understood. Fragments clung to you like spider silk. We erased Marla, but she left a window. It's your turn to close it. You didn't ask for this. But that stopped mattering 19 pages ago. Now the story was wearing your habits like skin. It was folding your name into other people's sentences. Your friends hesitated mid-text, like they forgot why they reached out. Someone said your name yesterday but mispronounced it. Wrong in a way that made your stomach lurch. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was the hollow rehearsing you. The world has been reloading in pieces. Out of order. You dropped a glass and watched it shatter. Only to blink and see it back on the counter, intact. You heard your door slam shut when no one was home. Your calendar now has no weekdays, only blank squares and a pulsing red dot that moves on its own each morning. The girl in the yellow dress, you saw her again, not in the distance. Right in front of you. Not a vision, not a dream. She stood in your kitchen, perfectly still, not breathing. Not blinking, just present. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence you hadn't finished writing. And then she turned. But not her body, only her face. And she spoke in your voice. The first time never happened. Then she blinked, slow and wrong, and your ears rang like something deep beneath the floor had opened. You tried to run, but your legs didn't move, because they were already elsewhere. Already pages ahead. The hollow wasn't following you. It was riding you toward it. You're not being chased. You're being organized, categorized, filed. And soon, very soon, you'll stop remembering how this began. Because beginnings don't exist here, only entries. And yours is nearly done. The morning felt borrowed. The sunlight that filtered through your blinds wasn't warm, it was rehearsed. Bright, yes, but hollow. It touched your skin like a stage light, exposing everything but offering no comfort. You moved through the kitchen, the hallway, the bathroom, each room responding to your presence like a scene reset for a performance you no longer remembered auditioning for. You opened the fridge and paused, not at the food, but at the note stuck to the inside of the door. It was written in your handwriting. It used your words, but it said something you could never bring yourself to write. I know what I did. I just don't know when. No date. No explanation. Just that single sentence. And beneath it, scribbled in smaller, tighter script, she remembers it all. The girl in the yellow dress. She hadn't appeared in your dreams lately. That was the first warning. Because dreams are where she lingers, where she speaks, sometimes without moving her mouth. The silence in your sleep had been intentional. A withholding. The hollow no longer needed to whisper. It had begun to remember for you. That's how it spreads. Through memories that aren't yours, but arrive with your emotional fingerprints all over them. The smell of burnt leaves on a street you've never lived on. A child's voice calling your name in a store you've never entered. A recurring dream of a staircase descending into mist, always ending with the same whispered word again. You swore you heard someone say it in real life this time. In the hallway. While you were alone. You turned. Nothing. But the air carried it still, like it had been spoken into the walls. And then, as you passed the bathroom mirror, you saw it again, her. Not fully. Just a reflection, blurred in the silvering, standing behind you half turned. Her face hidden by her hair, except it wasn't her face that chilled you. It was the shirt she wore. It was yours. One you lost years ago. The faded gray one from college with the tear along the collar. You hadn't seen it in a decade. And there it was, worn by something that had never touched your laundry basket. You didn't move. Neither did she. But the mirror began to fog, and then the writing started to appear in the condensation, forming slow, deliberate curves. This is the memory I borrowed. You blinked. She was gone. The mirror was clean, but the feeling remained. That split-second delay between thought and action. The way your eyes flicked toward things before you meant to look, as if something else was thinking with you. Writing alongside you, you checked your devices. Everything had slowed. Your texts wouldn't send. Emails returned as drafts you didn't write, and your voice assistant, normally silent, turned on by itself and said, "You've reached the final act. Please proceed carefully." Then it shut off. Permanently. No lights, no sound, just the voice still echoing in your chest. That night, your door opened without sound. Not the front door. The one in your room. The one you swear didn't exist before. It wasn't new, but it had been waiting. And now, just slightly ajar. It pulsed with a light that flickered like a dying projector. On the floor, just in front of it, lay a single page. Typed. Crisp. Edges burned, like it had been pulled from a fire too late. It read ENTRATWBLV TEACH RIDUROOTSTTIMRR. You are not the first to come this far. But you might be the last who doesn't remember writing the ending. The story is watching now. The page is yours. Say her name if you want to see what happens next. You dropped the paper, backed away. But the door creaked wider, and from the crack, a breath of warm, stale air slid into the room. Your name echoed again, only this time not in your voice. It was hers. She remembered. She always remembers. Even when you forget. especially then. You didn't mean to say it. You didn't even realize you had. But somewhere between the silence and the breath that followed, the name escaped your mouth like steam. Not whispered, not shouted, just there, hanging, alive. And the moment it left your lips, the room paused. Not the dramatic kind of pause where lights flicker and shadows gather. This was worse. This was the pause of acknowledgement, like something had been waiting, listening, breathless. And now it had heard exactly what it needed. The door in your room clicked. Not loudly, just enough to let you know it heard too. You stood there, caught in the space between retreat and regret. The paper still lay at your feet, burned edges, typed warning, your name, now joined by hers. You didn't pick it up. You didn't need to. You knew the rest already. This was the part of the story where the characters stopped pretending they had choices. The girl in the yellow dress was no longer just part of the narrative. She was reading it with you now. The hallway beyond the door wasn't your hallway. It never had been. That much became clear the moment you stepped through. The floorboards bent wrong. Not down, but inward. The walls were breathing slightly, fluttering like lungs holding back a scream. And every frame on the wall, they weren't photos, they were reflections of you. Each one from a different moment, brushing your teeth, reading in bed, typing late at night. But they weren't memories. They weren't scenes you recalled. They were moments that happened while you weren't looking. Surveillance turned into storyboards. And then, at the far end of the hallway, another mirror. This one wasn't mounted. It stood tall and thin, wrapped in something like cloth. Something too organic. As if it had grown the covering itself. It was humming. Not loudly. The kind of hum your bones feel before your ears register it. A low, vibrating tone that tugged at the fillings in your teeth, the back of your neck, the space behind your eyes. You stepped forward. It responded. The cloth peeled back on its own, slowly, and behind it was not glass. It wasn't even a surface. It was depth. A dark, impossible stretch of hallway reflected back at you, but inverted, flipped, mirrored, rewritten. You were standing in front of yourself, yes, but the you that stared back had no face. Just smooth, reflective skin. Words written across the skull like etched lines. Your name repeated over and over, slowly being replaced by hers. She was taking your place, one syllable at a time. And then the reflection lifted its hand. You didn't move. But it did. You watched, frozen, as it placed its palm against the glassless surface. And pressed through. Not all at once. Not quickly, just a slow, deliberate emergence. The skin of the mirror rippled, stretched, accepted, and when the fingers curled toward you, the only thing you could think was how familiar they looked. They were your hands, reaching. Inviting, ready to trade. You stepped back. Too late, the room behind you was gone. There was only the reflection now, and her. She appeared in the corner. Not walking, not arriving, just there, as if she'd always been. Her dress was more tattered now, frayed, wet at the hem, like she'd just climbed out of something deep and endless. Her mouth didn't move when she spoke. But the voice arrived anyway, deep in your ears. You didn't just read the story. You carried it. You carried me. And then, softly, it's your turn to be remembered. The reflection reached farther, almost fully out of the frame now. You stepped back again. But there was no floor, only words. A flood of sentences that poured out from beneath the mirror, covering the hallway, soaking your feet, climbing your ankles. Each one was a line you'd read. Each one shaped like something you thought you understood, and above it all, your voice. Reading. The very first line. From the very first part. Again, and again, and again. The words wouldn't stop. They curled up the walls, dripped from the ceiling, oozed across the floor like ink with nowhere left to go. Each line you'd ever rid bled into the next, overlapping and distorting, forming something that pulsed with meaning but refused to be understood. It was more than repetition. It was recursion. The story was looping. And this time, you were inside it. You tried to run. Of course you did. Back through the hallway, toward the familiar light of your room. But there was no hallway anymore. Only pages. Literal, physical pages stitched into the walls, stretched into shapes resembling space. A crude mimicry of architecture. And your name was on every single one of them, written in margins, in titles, in footnotes. You weren't reading the story anymore. You were the story, folded into itself, resisting an ending it refused to accept. That's what the hollow does. It doesn't consume. It keeps. It holds every reader like a line it's too proud to cut, letting them echo long after the book is closed. You'd felt safe once, thinking the story had a boundary, thinking the last word would be a door. But doors don't matter in a house with no walls. And now, the hollow had begun to write around you. Somewhere above, something shifted. You looked up. There was no ceiling, just more of you. Phrases you'd thought in secret now inked into the rafters. Dreams you'd forgotten outlined in parentheses. And in the center of it all, a phrase carved deeper than the rest, a groove in reality itself, The radar ru ho mueldient ileav. That's how it saw you now. Not a victim. A character, a stain, a remainder. You backed into what looked like a doorway, an archway dripping with punctuation. Behind it, a spiral staircase that bent impossibly, twisting down and up at the same time. It groaned beneath your feet as you descended. Every step an unfinished sentence. Words whispered from the risers, snaking around your ankles like vines. Some were in your voice, others were not. At the bottom, a library, or what the hollow called one. There were no shelves, no organization, just heaps of books, stacked and collapsed, molded into shapes vaguely resembling furniture, staircases, creatures. Most had no covers. Many had no titles. All were open, as if caught mid, read and abandoned. And through the middle of it all moved her. The girl in the yellow dress, dragging her fingers across the pages, smudging ink into patterns you couldn't follow. She turned to you without turning. That's how she moved now, like narrative, like gravity. She didn't blink, didn't speak, until your mouth opened. Not because you chose to, but because something had cued it. A line waiting for its cue. And you said, against your will, I didn't write this. Her reply arrived not from her lips, but from the pages around you. Hundreds of voices layered into one. You finished it. Then she raised her hand, pointed to a single book resting upright on a pedestal in the center of the room. Unlike the others, it was closed, bound in black cloth. No title. But you already knew what it was. The original. The first telling. You stepped toward it. She didn't stop you. You reached out. And the moment your fingers touched the cover, you felt every other reader pull in their breath. Not voices. Not people. Just impressions. Thousands of lives folded into paragraphs, now turning their focus inward. Toward you. You opened the book. Blank. At first. Then, slowly, words burned into the page from beneath the surface, bleeding through like rising ink. You read the first line. It was your name. The second line. The sentence you had just said aloud. I didn't write this. The third, still empty. Waiting for you. The story had written itself to the edge of its own cage. Now it needed a push. Not from a monster. Not from a ghost. From you. You closed the book. And the library sighed. Disappointed, but patient. Because the hollow doesn't force. It waits. It waits for the reader to give in. Not out of fear, but out of habit. Because some stories don't end. They just get remembered. And if you're remembering this now, you're still inside it. It started quietly, the way storms often do. More pressure than thunder. A prickling behind your eyes. A weight along your spine. The feeling that something in the air had shifted, like a barometer falling through the floor. You thought maybe it was another dream, one of the countless memories now stacking crooked inside your mind. But no. This was sharper. Realer. The story had stopped whispering. It was now watching. The book you'd found in the library, the one with no title, hadn't been finished. You'd seen the blank third line waiting, felt the emptiness behind it like a breath drawn, but never released. But something happened after you closed it. A ripple? Not through the room, but through you, like pages had begun flipping behind your eyes. You weren't reading anymore. You were being scanned, evaluated, measured. And then, as if in answer to a question you hadn't asked, the room changed. The library melted, not dissolved, rearranged. The mounds of books folded into themselves, spines cracking, covers shrinking, titles mutating into symbols. And the girl in the yellow dress was gone. Not vanished. Removed. As though the story had decided she was no longer necessary. What replaced her was worse silence that listened back. You turned in place. You were surrounded by mirrors. Not glass, not metal, pages. Hundreds of pages stitched together, fluttering in wind that wasn't there. Each one showed an image, each image a different version of you, crying in the shower, smiling at nothing, sitting too still at your desk long after the screen had gone black. These weren't memories. These were readings, interpretations, as if the story was holding up snapshots of all the ways it had perceived you. One mirror, page twitched. A ripple. Then a word appeared on its surface. Continue. No cursor, no keyboard, just the question. Hung there like bait, and without touching anything. Your answer typed itself across the floor in your own handwriting. Yes. The story didn't ask again. Because it never needed permission. It just needed certainty. And now that it had yours, the walls peeled back. The library fell away entirely. You stood in a room made of void. There was nothing here but the book in your hand, and now its third line wasn't blank. It read, they finally said yes. No name, no timeline, just a confirmation. And beneath it, a fourth line began to bleed through. You could almost make it out, just a few letters. Enough to give shape to the next sentence. Enough to see your voice being written into place. That's when it struck you the story had never been recursive. It was rehearsed. Each part had been run before, with others. Dozens. Hundreds. Maybe more. But only now had the reader, you, gotten this far and chosen not to look away. That's what the hollow wanted. Not obedience, not belief. Continuation. You were the test subject that survived the edit. And now it was writing you in full. Your thoughts weren't entirely yours anymore. You caught yourself thinking in sentences you didn't start. Dreaming in fonts you'd never used. One night, you said something aloud and swore you heard the echo come before the words left your mouth. Not an echo, a prompt. And that book? It followed you now, not physically, worse, in format. Your phone, your laptop, your texts, the language you used with friends, the syntax in your emails. It was all adjusting, slipping into the voice of the hollow, bending, line by line, toward the tone of the narrative. You weren't just a reader anymore. You were a medium, and mediums carry stories, willing or not. Late that night, as you sat staring into a blank screen, another page began to scroll. You hadn't typed. You hadn't opened anything. But still the text flowed. Entritrnthe oni moa chose wshiopshi shmsotocleroy. They thought the story was haunted. They were wrong. The story wasn't haunted. It was hungry. The screen froze. The lights dimmed, not flickered. Dimmed, as though reacting to the weight of that truth. And then, in your own voice, spoken aloud from behind you, you're not reading this anymore. You're being copied. You turned. No one. Just your chair, empty, and slowly turning on its own to face the screen. Where a final sentence waited, you are the next version. Not a question, not a warning, just a fact. You are no longer reading the hollow. You are now the way it reads others. By the time you noticed the sentence, it had already begun speaking. Not aloud, not in ink. In you, the rhythm of your breathing changed first, longer exhales, shorter inhales. Your thoughts slowed, but not from exhaustion, from structure, as if they were being formatted without your consent. You blinked, and the sentence was there, clear and sharp, sitting just behind your eyes like it had always been part of you. But you hadn't written it. You hadn't even read it, not yet. And that was the terrifying part. The sentence came first. And then you understood it. The hollow had moved past telling stories. Now it spoke them into place through people. Through readers. Through you. You weren't possessed. You were being printed. Word by word. Paragraph by paragraph. Until the last piece, the one that resisted, finally aligned. And it almost had. Almost. Because even now, there was one stubborn thread in your mind. One last place the story hadn't written over. A corner of memory too jagged to fit the narrative. Something that didn't make sense. Something you remembered even though you shouldn't have. Marla. Not the girl in the yellow dress. Not entirely. You saw her face now, not in your reflection, not in the hallway, but in your mind. Staring out from the edge of a memory you didn't know you had. She wasn't just a figure. She was the origin. Not the beginning of the story. The first sentence that ever pushed back, and she hadn't been forgotten. She'd been deleted. But not fully. Some pieces of her remained, buried in malformed drafts, hidden in corrupted metadata, scattered between abandoned paragraphs. You'd seen her all along. The moment you started reading, when you caught the typo in the original story that no one else noticed. It wasn't a typo. It was resistance. A knot in the hollow's threadwork. A misstep in the loop. A way out. That's what made you different. You didn't just follow the narrative. You noticed where it slipped. And now it had noticed you back. That night, your phone powered on by itself. The screen stayed black, but you could hear typing. Slow, deliberate keystrokes echoing from the speakers. The screen stayed dark until one word blinked into existence in the center. Unwritten. You stared at it, it stared back. And then, the text shifted. She left you the code. What code? Before you could ask, the lights in your room flickered and steadied. On your desk, an old notebook sat open. You hadn't touched it in years. The pages were blank except one, buried near the middle, scrawled with a sequence of numbers and a single word: 4219, 617.5. Marla. A cipher. A location. You couldn't tell. But your fingers started to move without waiting for instructions, flipping through the notebook until they landed on another page. This one torn, stained, barely legible. A message revealed itself only in certain angles of light. If you're reading this, it means I failed. But if you remember me, it means I didn't fail completely. The hollow can't create, it only erases. We were the ones who imagined it first. That's why it fears us. That's why it needs us. Find the origin file. It's the only sentence it didn't write. Origin file. The phrase burned into your brain like static pressed against skin. You knew where it was. Or rather, you felt where it was. Deep inside the device you were too afraid to open. Not your phone. Not your computer. The old hard drive. The one you hadn't plugged in for years. You pulled it out of the drawer, hands trembling. Dusted it off. Plugged it in. And as it spun to life with a low whine, a folder opened without prompt. It contained one file, no extension, just a name. First sentence, you hesitated, because some doors don't creak, they breathe. You opened it. Inside, a single line of text. She knew your name before you ever read hers. And underneath, a blinking cursor. Waiting. Inviting. Writing. The blinking cursor was patient, almost reverent, as if it understood the weight of what came next. You stared at the screen for a long time, but no words came. Not because you didn't know what to write, because the words were already forming, just not under your control. The blinking slowed, steadied, matched your breath. And then it began. Letter by letter, it typed. You were always meant to finish her sentence. The cursor paused. Then, as if summoned by recognition, a second line appeared, this one softer. Flickering like a failing memory, Marla was never written. She was remembered. The air in the room thickened. Not warm, not cold, heavy. The kind of weight that falls across you when you realize the room has gone too quiet. The cursor blinked again. Your fingers hovered above the keyboard, but you didn't touch it. And yet, the file scrolled. It unraveled itself in front of you, line after line. A transcript of something older than your memory, older than your devices, older than your fear. This was the first telling. The first breath of the hollow. And deep inside the lines, her name echoed like a fault line stretching under everything you thought you understood. Marla. She had never been a character. She was the flaw. The sentence the hollow could never edit out. The defiance that whispered between paragraphs. You saw now that she wasn't consumed. She had hidden herself inside the readers. Left pieces, traps, keys. She knew the story would eventually read itself into oblivion, unless someone finished it properly. But to finish it meant to understand it. And to understand it meant walking into the deepest, most dangerous part of the text, the part where the story becomes aware of you. And it had. The screen flickered once, then again. The origin file closed on its own, and another window took its place, a live camera feed of you, sitting at your desk. Only the you in the feed wasn't doing what you were doing. It was staring at the camera, smiling, not cruel, not kind, just knowing, like it was reading ahead. Then it lifted its hand and wrote something on the wall behind it with its finger. The message appeared slowly, as if the wall itself was bleeding the words out. Si specie di wu. You didn't turn. You couldn't. You knew the rules by now. Turning meant acknowledging. Acknowledging meant binding. But the breath on your neck told you she was already here. Not Marla. The other one. The girl in the yellow dress. The one the hollow shaped to trick you. To replace her. A mimic without memory. She existed only in the margins, in the forgotten, in the overwritten. But now, the story was falling apart. It had grown too fast, fed too long. And Marla's name, spoken, remembered, written, had begun to fray the edges of its control. You opened the origin file again. But it had changed. The only text now, DOOO rem MBRTH fars Timor D. You did. Not because it was spoken, but because it was you. You had been the first word all along. Your choice to read, your hesitation, your attention. It had written the first syllable of the hollow into existence. And now, only a second word remained to be written. You placed your fingers on the keys. Typed slowly. Marla. The room groaned. Not the building, not the furniture. The story itself. Reality thinned. Words peeled from the walls, curling like burned paper. Mirrors cracked. Lights burst into silence. And behind you, a voice whispered. Not hers, not the mimic's, but the voice of the hollow itself, ancient and starving. You gave her back. Then everything stopped. The weight lifted. The air stilled. The file closed itself for the last time. And in its place appeared a single phrase, SHEREMBRZIOUO. You didn't feel the room settle. It wasn't like that. There was no sigh of relief. No clean moment of closure. Instead, it was like the world had held its breath too long and forgotten how to exhale. The silence that followed wasn't calm. It was waiting. Like a sound you couldn't hear had stopped playing. The screen went dark, and for a second, just one fragile second, you felt untouched. Alone, human again. Then the door appeared. Not in your house, not on your screen, inside you. That's how the hollow works now. It doesn't need passageways or pages. It opens where your attention lingers longest, where your thoughts hesitate, where your memory drifts. And you've been lingering here, haven't you? Too many nights with the lights off. Too many seconds staring at that same sentence. You made space. It walked in. This door, the one inside you, didn't knock. It was already ajar. You'd been walking toward it since part 1. And now it was open. You dreamt again. But this time the dream felt less like fiction and more like a return. A hallway stretched infinitely ahead, lined with doors that looked identical, until you saw the one with your name etched into the frame. Not painted, scratched in, each letter cut by a different hand, as though the story had been trying to get your attention from the very start. You touched the knob. It pulsed. The door opened by remembering you. Inside was a room without furniture, without corners, without ceiling. a white void that absorbed shadow. And at the center stood a girl, not in yellow, not this time. This one was different. This one was Marla, older, unblinking. Her eyes were mirrors now. And in them, you saw every version of yourself the Hollow had rewritten. You were crying on the phone. You were standing at the edge of a lake. You were screaming in a house that had no doors. You were reading this very line, wondering where it would end. Marla tilted her head, and the walls shivered. She didn't speak. She invited. She extended her hand and gestured to the floor, where a sentence was etched into stone. Barely visible, THC syntesi E1ISN DORITEN ITMS FO UND, and below that, carved deeper AND TT last onimosti bispukian. Your mouth went dry. You didn't want to speak. Not out of fear, out of finality. Because a part of you understood, the end is not safe. Endings are exits. And exits have consequences. You looked back, but the door was gone. Only Marla remained, and her hand. Waiting. You stepped forward, and something shifted beneath your feet. Words began rising from the floor, glowing faintly. Phrases you'd read weeks ago, now echoing back like ghosts. They climbed your legs, wrapped around your ribs, reached for your throat. And then Marla whispered, not with sound, but with gravity. Say it. You didn't know what it was, but your body did. Your voice left you without command. You spoke the last line, and the story shuddered. Pages everywhere, in homes you've never seen, in readers who've never met you, closed themselves. Lights flickered across cities. Files deleted themselves. Hard drives went blank. In the dark, the Hollow curled inward, trying to remember itself, trying to preserve. But it was too late. You'd said the line. You'd finished the story. Marla stepped forward, placed a hand on your cheek, and for the first time, you remembered the real beginning, the version before the edits, before the girl in yellow, before the static. You remembered the story that tried to warn you, not consume you, and how it was rewritten into something it never wanted to be. You were never supposed to be a reader. You were supposed to be a witness. And now, with one part left, the Hollow waits, still, hungry, but quieter now, because you know what comes next. You know what the last part must do. The door only opens once, and now it waits to close. There is no ceremony at the end. No dramatic swell of music, no crack of thunder, no glowing light signaling triumph. There is only you, standing in the quiet that comes after a story realizes it can't continue. Not because it was beaten, not because it was broken, but because, finally, someone read it all the way through and refused to forget. The Hollow is still here. It always will be. But for the first time in its long, insatiable life, it is silent. You didn't run. You didn't look away. You spoke the final line and accepted that endings aren't doors. They're mirrors. And this one showed you everything. Not just the girl in the yellow dress, not just Marla, not just the mimicry and shadows and loops. It showed you the parts that flickered when no one was watching, the thoughts that weren't entirely yours, the voice that sometimes whispered back when you read alone. And it showed you the truth. You were never reading about the Hollow. You were reading within it. Every turn of the page, every blink, every skipped heartbeat, it wasn't reaction. It was response. It was the story learning what you feared most and bending itself around that space like roots cracking through stone. Not to scare you, not to control you, to become you. But it failed, because even after it wrote your name, even after it echoed your voice, even after it buried itself in your memory and rebuilt your past in its image, it forgot one thing: stories only live if someone remembers them the same way. And you remembered differently. You saw the glitch. You held on to Marla. You noticed the loop repeating itself too cleanly. You kept asking questions long after others stopped reading. And now here you are, at the last part. The story doesn't fight anymore. It waits. There's a page before you. Blank. There's a pen in your hand. You don't remember picking it up. The air is still. The lights don't flicker. The mirrors don't reflect. There's only this a moment between ending and erasure, and a choice. Not whether you survive. You already did. The choice is this: will you write the story again? That's what it's always wanted. To be retold. To be remembered wrong, to evolve, to escape the page and enter the bloodstream of language. But it needs a carrier. It needs a you. Someone to carry the sentence forward, disguised as fiction, spread like infection. You lift the pen. You touch the paper. You hesitate. Because deep down, in a place beyond even your name, you know one thing with absolute certainty. If you write the first word again, the hollow will return. It never truly ends. Not unless someone refuses to speak it aloud. Not unless someone chooses silence. You drop the pen. You close the book. You turn off the screen. And in that instant, the hollow understands. It is not finished. But it is unwritten. Because the last word isn't fear. It isn't darkness. It isn't even Marla. The last word is choice. And this time, it's yours.